Hi! Hello, good afternoon. I'm Charlotte, and I figured I would start this little channel to use for reading because with everything going on with a global pandemic and so many people being homebound, I thought it's a good time to catch up on some reading that I've been putting aside, and I couldn't think of anything better than to spend an interminable amount of time on than Leo Tolstoy's War and Peace. It's a pretty hefty tome, so I figured since I have all this time on my hands, why not get started? Why not share it with you guys? So I'm going to be reading a little bit every day or so and keep it up on my channel so you can stream in the background as you fall asleep. This is something that was just sitting around the house. A little background, or just the preface, War and Peace, Leo Tolstoy. This translation is from the original Russian by Richard Pavir and Larissa Volkonsky, and I will probably butcher the Russian names. I'm very sorry. If I stumble through any of them on a read, I will be sure to look up proper pronunciation and hopefully collect it on the next reading. So, thank you for being here, and let's just dive right in. I think introductions are lame, especially if they're not actually written by the original author. So I'm going to skip through the introduction, and there's a list of characters. Boring. Okay, so 2 minutes in, and let's actually get started with the meat of it. Volume 1, Part 1. Eh bien, mon prince, jeunesse et Lucas ne sont plus que des éponges des états de la famille Bonaparte. Non, je vous préviens que si vous ne me dites pas que nous avons la guerre, si vous vous permettez encore de les parler tous les infamies, toutes les atrocités de cet antéchrist, ma parole, je crois, je ne vous connais plus. Vous n'êtes plus ami, vous n'êtes plus my faithful slave, comme vous dites. Well, good evening, je vois que je vois sit down and tell me about it. I didn't know there was going to be French. Sorry. So spoke in July 1805 the renowned Anna Pavlovna Scherer, maid of the honor and intimate of the Empress Maria Fedorovna, greeting the important and high-ranking Prince Vasily, the first to arrive at her soiree. Anna Pavlovna had been coughing for several days. She had the grippe, as she put it. Grippe was a new word then, used only by rare people. Little notes had been sent out that morning with a red-liveried footman, and on all of them, without distinction, there was written, Si vous n'avez rien de mieux à faire, monsieur le comte, ou mon prince, et si la perspective de passer la soirée chez un pauvre malade ne vous effraie pas trop, je serai charmé de vous voir chez moi entre 7 et 10 heures. Annette Scherer. Dieu, quelle virulente sortie! The entering prince replied, not ruffled in the least by such a reception. He was wearing an embroidered court uniform, stockings, shoes, and stars, and had a bright expression on his flat face. He spoke that refined French in which our grandparents not only spoke, but thought, and with those quiet, patronizing intonations which are proper to a significant man who has grown old in society and at court. He went over to Anna Pavlovna, kissed her hand, presenting her with his perfumed and shining bald pate, settled comfortably on the sofa. Avant tout, dites-moi comment vous allez, chère amie. Set me at ease, he said without changing his voice and in a tone which, though through propriety and sympathy one could discern indifference and even mockery. How can one be well when one suffers morally? It is impossible to remain at ease in our time if one has any feeling, said Anna Pavlovna. You'll stay the whole evening, I hope? And the fete at the British ambassador's? Today is Wednesday. I must put in my appearance, said the prince. My daughter will come and fetch me and take me there. I thought tonight's fete was cancelled. Je vous avoue que tout ce fete et tout ce fut des artifices commencement à devenir insipidis. If they had known that you wished it, the fete would have been cancelled, said the prince, uttering out of habit, like a wound-up clock, things that he did not even wish people to believe. Ne me trompez pas, à bien, que tout on décide par rapport à la dépêche de nouvelles-vous. Vous savez tout. What can I tell you? Said the prince, in a cold, bored tone. Quand on décide, on ne décide que Bonaparte et brûler ses vaisseaux, et je crois que nous sommes en train de brûler les nôtres. Prince Vasily always spoke lazily, the way an actor speaks a role in an old play. Anna Pavlovna Sharera, on the contrary, spoke, despite her 40s, was brimming with animation and impulse. Being an enthusiast had become her social position, and she sometimes became enthusiastic even when she had no wish to, so as not to deceive the expectations of people who knew her. The restrained smile that constantly played on Anna Pavlovna's face, though it did not suit her outworn features, expressed, as it does in spoiled children, a constant awareness of her dear shortcomings which she did not wish, could not, and found no need to correct. In the midst of a conversation about political doings, Anna Pavlovna waxed vehement. Ah, don't speak to me of Austria. Maybe I don't understand anything, but Austria does not want and has never wanted war. She's betraying us. Russia alone must be the savior of Europe. Our benefactor knows his lofty calling and will be faithful to it. That is the one thing I trust in. Our kind and wonderful sovereign is faced with the greatest role in the world, and he is so virtuous and good that God will not abandon him, and he will fulfill his calling to crush the hydra of revolution, which has now become still more terrible in the person of this murderer and villain. We alone must redeem the blood of the righteous one. In whom can we trust, I ask you? England with her commercial spirit will not and cannot understand all the loftiness of the Emperor Alexander's soul. She refused to evacuate Malta. She wants to see. She searches for ulterior motives in our act. What did they say to Novosiltsov? Nothing. They did not. They could not understand the self-denial of our emperor, who wants nothing for himself and everything for the good of the world. And what have they promised? Nothing. And what did they promise that will not be done? Prussia has already declared that Bonaparte is invincible and that all Europe can do nothing against him. I don't believe a single word of Hardenberg or of Haugwitz. Cette fameuse neutresse prochaine, ce n'est que prêche. I trust only in God and in the lofty destiny of our dear emperor. He will save Europe. She suddenly stopped with a mocking smile at her own vehemence. I think, the prince said, smiling, that if they sent you instead of our dear Winzingerode, you would take the Prussian king's consent by storm. You're so eloquent. Will you give me tea? At once. À propos, she said, calming down again. I'll have two very interesting men here tonight. Le Vicomte de Montemont. Il est allé hors Montmorency par le Rhin. One of the best French families. He's one of the good émigrés. One of the real ones. And then l'Abbé Montriot. Do you know that profound mind? He's been received by the sovereign. Do you know him? Ah, I'll be very glad, said the prince. Tell me, he added, as if just recalling something, and with special casualness, thought what he asked about was the main purpose of his visit. Is it true l'Emeritus Mayor wants Baron Funk to be named the first secretary in Vienna? C'est son paresseux, ce baron a ce qu'il parfait. Prince Vasily wanted his son to be appointed to this post, which, though the Empress Maria Fedorovna had been solicited for the Baron. Through the Empress Maria Fedorovna had been solicited for the Baron. Anna Pavlovna all but closed her eyes as a sign that neither she nor anyone else could judge of the Empress's good pleasure or liking. Monsieur le Baron de Fonck it recommande elle impératrice mais pas son sûr. She merely said in a sad, dry tone. The moment Anna Pavlovna mentioned the Empress, her face suddenly presented a profound and sincere expression of devotion and respect, combined with sadness, which happened each time she referred to her exalted patroness in conversation. She said that Her Majesty had deigned to show Baron Fonck beaucoup d'estime, and her eyes again clouded over with sadness. The prince lapsed into indifferent silence. Anna Pavlovna, with her courtly and feminine adroitness and ready tact, wanted both to swat the prince for daring to make such a pronouncement about a person recommended to the Empress, and at the same time to comfort him. Mais à propos de votre famille, she said, do you know that your daughter, since her coming out, fait les délices de tout le monde? On la trouve belle comme le jour. The prince bowed in a sign of respect and gratitude. I often think, Anna Pavlovna went on after a moment's silence, moving closer to the prince and smiling tenderly at him, as if to show thereby that the political and social conversations were at an end and a heart-to-heart one was beginning. I often think how unfairly life's good fortune is sometimes distributed. Why has fate given you two such nice children, excluding Anatoly, your youngest? I don't like him, she put in peremptorily, raising her eyebrows. Such lovely children, and you really value them less than anyone, and are therefore unworthy of them. And she smiled her rapturous smile. Que voulez-vous? La voiture aurait dit que je n'ai pas les bourses de la paternité, said the prince. Stop joking. I want to talk seriously with you. You know I'm displeased with your younger son. Just between us, her face acquired a sad look. There was talk about him at Her Majesty's, and you were pitied. The prince did not reply, but she fell silent, looking at him significantly, waiting for a reply. Prince Vasily winced. What am I to do? He said finally. You know I did all a father could for their upbringing, and they both turned out des imbéciles. Hippolyte is at least an untroublesome fellow, but Anatoly is a troublesome one. That's the only difference, he said, smiling more unnaturally and animatedly than usual, and with that showing especially clearly in the wrinkles that formed around his mouth, something unexpectedly coarse and disagreeable. Why do such people as you have children? You weren't a father. If you weren't a father, I'd have nothing to reproach you for, said Anna Pavlovna, raising her eyes pensively. Je suis votre faithful slave, et vous seul je peux le avoir. My children, ce sont les entrées de mon existence. That's my cross. I explain it that way to myself. Que voulez-vous? He paused, expressing with a gesture his submission to the cruel fate. Anna Pavlovna fell to thinking. Have you never thought of getting your prodigal son Anatoly married? They say, she observed, that old maids ont la manie des mariages. I don't feel that I have that weakness yet, but I know one petite personne who is very unhappy with her father. Une parente à nous, une princesse Bolokonsky. Prince Vasily did not reply, though with the quickness of grasp and memory characteristic of society people, he showed by a nod of the head that he had taken this information into account. No, you know this Anatoly costs me 40,000 a year, he said, obviously unable to restrain the melancholy course of his thoughts. He paused. How will it be in 5 years if it goes on like this? Voilà l'avantage d'être Pierre. Is she rich, this princess of yours? Her father is very rich and stingy. He lives in the country. You know, it's the famous Prince Bolkonsky, already retired under the late emperor and nicknamed the King of Prussia. He's a very intelligent man, but an odd and difficult one. Le pauvre petit est malus comme le père. She has a brother, Kutuzov's adjunct, the one who recently married Lise Menine. He'll come tonight. Écoutez, chérie Annette, said the prince, suddenly taking his interlocutor by the hands and pulling it down for some reason. Arrangement cette affaire, et je suis votre faithful slave à tout jamais. Slave comme mon village headman. Écrit des reports. F instead of T. She's from a good family and rich, that's all I need. And with those free and familiarly graceful moments which distinguished him, he took the maid of honor's hand, kissed it, and having kissed it, waved the maid of honorly's hand a little, sprawled himself in an armchair, and looked away. Attendez, Anna Pavlovna said ponderingly. Tonight I'll discuss it with Lise, the femme de Jean Bolonsky, and maybe something can be settled. C'est dans votre famille que je ferai mon apprentissage de ville fille. And that was a really rough part one. I didn't realize there'd be so much French. So my apologies for the horrible pronunciation. I think I'll stop there. I think that's enough for one day. A good 15 minutes of poor pronunciation is more than I should put most people through. But if you have any thoughts or recommendations, feel free to drop them in the comments. Otherwise, thanks for dropping by. We got through that much. I don't know if you can see. And most of that was the introduction, so hopefully I think we'll have enough quarantine for a bit of this. Thanks! Bye! Good afternoon. We're back again with more War and Peace. Again, I'm Charlotte, and spending some quality quarantine time with Leo Tolstoy's War and Peace. I figured I have the time to finally crack this bad boy open. You weren't here last time. I just read the very first section with the degree of terror at all the French that was in it. I like to think I know some French, but definitely not that much, as friends of mine who do speak French were quick to point out and laugh at me about. And I got some explanation from a friend in New Zealand who also, among other things, did give me this amazing shirt that I have slightly destroyed but still love. Hey, Yulia. Yulia speaks Russian and was saying that it was very common to speak French in Russia. I think she said in the 17th and 18th century. Could be wrong. Definitely at least the 1800s. But speak French in Russia if you were wealthy or upper class. So a little bit of history on that. So Leo Tolstoy, though, is pulling no punches. I thought it would just be tough French or Russian names that I'd have to worry about. And here he has paragraphs of French for me to stumble through. So my apologies. I think there's less French in this next section. Basically, I'm reading till my arm gets tired of holding this book. So there's that. We'll still read a little bit more today. And then after today, we'll stay tuned until Monday for more. Recap last time. Just an opening scene of Anna Pavlovna, who's like a socialite, having a meeting with I was offered some pizza. It's for me, but it's not for me right now. Anyway, so Anna Pavlovna having a little soiree at her place with a Prince Vasily, who has 3 kids that he doesn't really care that much about, and Anatoly is his youngest and a bit of a troublemaker. She doesn't like him, so they're trying to set him up with some rich guy's daughter, just so he can be out of his dad's hair. That's all the excitement we've had so far, other than my horrible French. Also, I've noticed there is some footnotes for the French, so I could alternately read the English translation of the French if you guys wanted me to. So you probably have to jump in the comments and say, okay, enough with your French. Also, what are they saying? And then maybe I'll just read the French or the English translation of the French in place of. But I feel like that might mess up the flow and also lose a little bit of the flavor of the novel. But then again, it's also nice to know what people are saying. But, a little bit of mystery. Either way, I'm going to read it as is right now without any of the translations. I'll get through hopefully a part or two, and before we call it a day. So this is Volume 1, Part 1, Section 2. Let's just jump right in, shall we? Anna Pavlovna's drawing room gradually began to fill up. The high nobility of Petersburg came. People quite diverse in age and character, but alike in the society they lived in. Prince Vasily's daughter, the beautiful Helene, came to fetch her father and go with him to the fête at the ambassador's. She was wearing a ball gown with a monogram. Evidently. The young little princess Bolkonsky, known as La Femme la plus séduite de Petersburg, also came. Married the previous winter, she did not go into high society now for reason of her pregnancy, but did still go to small soirees. Prince Hippolyte, Prince Vasily's son, came with Mortemart, whom he introduced. The Abbé Morio also came, and many others. Have you seen yet, or have you made the acquaintance of ma tante? Anna Pavlovna said to the arriving guests, and led them quite seriously to a little old lady in high ribbons who had come sailing out of the next room as soon as the guests began to arrive, calling them by name, slowly shifting her gaze from the guest to ma tante, and then walked away. All the guests performed the ritual of greeting the totally unknown, totally uninteresting, and totally unnecessary aunt. With sad, solemn sympathy, Anna Pavlovna followed their greetings, silently approving of them. To each of them, ma tante spoke in the same expressions about his health, her own health, and the health of Her Majesty, which, thank God, was better that day. And those who went up to her, showing no haste for propriety's sake, left the little old lady with a feeling of relief after the fulfillment of a heavy obligation, never to approach her again all evening. The young Princess Bolkonsky came with handwork in a gold-embroidered velvet bag. Her pretty upper lip, with its barely visible black mustache, was too short for her teeth, but the more sweetly it did open, and still more sweetly did it sometimes stretch and close on the lower one. As happens with perfectly attractive women, her flaw, a short lip and a half-opened mouth, seemed her special personal beauty. Everyone felt cheerful looking at this pretty future mother full of health and liveliness, who bore her conditions so easily. To old men and to bored, morose young men, it seemed that they themselves came to resemble her, having been with her and spoken with her for a time. Anyone who talked with her and saw her bright little smile at every word and her gleaming white teeth, which showed constantly, thought himself especially amiable that day, and that is what each of them thought. The little princess, waddling, went around the table with small, quick steps, her bag of handwork hanging on her arm, and cheerfully straightened her dress, sat down on the sofa near the silver samovar, looking as though everything she did was a partie de plaisir for her and for everyone around her. J'apporte mon ouvrage, she said, unclasping her reticule and addressing them all together. Look, Annette, ne me juge pas un mauvais tour. She turned to the hostess. Vous m'avez écrit que était un tout petit soirée voyage comme je suis à tes filles. and she spread her arms to show her elegant gray lace-trimmed dress tied slightly below the breast with broad ribbons. Soyez tranquilles, vous serez toujours la plus jolie, Anna Pavlovna replied. Vous savez, mon mari m'a abandonné, she went on in the same tone, turning to a general. Il va se faire tout. Dis-moi pourquoi cette vilaine gueule, she said to Prince Vasily, and not waiting for an answer, turned to Prince Vasily's daughter, the beautiful Hélène. Quelle délicieuse personne que cette petite princesse, Prince Vasily said to Anna Pavlovna. Soon after the little princess came, a massive fat young man with a cropped head, in spectacles, light-colored trousers of the latest fashion, a high jabot, and a brown tailcoat. This fat young man was the illegitimate son of a famous courtier from Catherine's time, Count Bezukhov, who was now dying in Moscow. He did not serve anywhere yet. He had only just arrived from abroad where he had been educated, and this was his first time in society. Anna Pavlovna greeted him with a nod reserved for people of the lowest hierarchy in her salon. But despite this greeting of the lowest sort, at the sight of the entering Pierre, uneasiness and fear showed in Anna Pavlovna's face, like that expressed at the sight of something all too enormous and unsuited to the place. Though Pierre was indeed somewhat larger than the other men in the room, this fear could have referred only to the intelligent, at the same time shy, observant, and natural gaze which distinguished him from everyone else in the drawing room. C'est bien aimable à vous, Monsieur Pierre, d'être venu voir un pauvre malade, Anna Pavlovna said to him, exchanging fearful looks with the aunt to whom she was bringing him. Pierre burbled something incomprehensible and went on searching for something with his eyes. He smiled joyfully, merrily, bowed to the little princess as to a close acquaintance, and went up to the aunt. Anna Pavlovna's fear was not in vain, because Pierre, without hearing out the aunt's talk about Her Majesty's health, walked away from her. The frightened Anna Pavlovna stopped him with the words, "You don't know about the Abbé Mouriot? He's a very interesting man," she said. "Yes, I've heard about his plan for eternal peace, and it's very interesting, but hardly possible." "You think so?" said Anna Pavlovna, in order to say something, and again turned to her duties as mistress of the house. But Pierre committed the reverse discourtesy. Earlier he had walked away upon hearing out a lady who was talking to him. Now he held with his conversation to a lady who needed to leave him. Lowering his head and spreading his big feet, he began to explain to Anna Pavlovna why he thought that the Abbé's plan was a chimera. "We'll talk later," Anna Pavlovna said, smiling, and ridding herself of the young man who did not know how to live, she returned to her duties as mistress of the house and went on listening and looking out, ready to come to the rescue at any point where the conversation lagged. As the owner of a spinning mill, having put his workers in their places, strolls about the establishment, watching out for an idle spindle or the odd one squealing much too loudly, and hastens to go and slow it down or start it up at the proper speed. So Anna Pavlovna strolled about her drawing room, going up to a circle that had fallen silent or was too talkative, and with one word or rearrangement set the conversation machine running evenly and properly again. But amidst all these cares, there could still be seen in her a special fear for Pierre. She glanced at him concernedly when he went over to listen to what was being talked about around Montmartre, and went on to another circle where the Abbé was talking. For Pierre, brought up abroad, this soirée of Anna Pavlovna's was the first he had seen in Russia. He knew that all the intelligentsia of Petersburg was gathered here, and like a child in a toy shop, he looked everywhere at once. He kept fearing to miss intelligent conversations that he might have listened to. Looking at the self-assured and elegant expressions on the faces gathered here, he kept expecting something especially intelligent. Finally, he went up to Mouriot. The conversation seemed interesting to him, and he stopped, waiting for a chance to voice his thoughts, as young people like to do. Part 3. Or Section 3. Sorry. Anna Pavlovna's soirée got going. The spindles on all sides hummed evenly and ceaselessly. Besides ma tante, next to whom sat only one elderly lady with a thin, weepy face, somewhat alien to this brilliant company, the company had broken up into 3 circles. In one, mostly masculine, the center was the abbé. In another, of young people. It was the beautiful Princess Helene, Prince Vasily's daughter, and the pretty red-cheeked little Princess Bolkonsky, too plump for her age. In the third, it was Montmartre and Anna Pavlovna. The Viscount was a nice-looking young man with soft features and manners, obviously regarded himself as a celebrity, but from good breeding, modestly allowed himself to be made use of by the company in which he found himself. Anna Pavlovna was obviously treating her guests to him. As a good maître d'hôtel presents as something supernaturally excellent a piece of beef one would not want to eat if one saw it in the dirty kitchen, so that evening Anna Pavlovna served up to her guests first the Vicomte, then the Abbé, as something supernaturally refined. In Montmartre circles, the conversation turned at once to the murder of the Duc d'Enghien. The Vicomte said that the Duc d'Enghien had perished from his own magnanimity, and that there were special reasons for Bonaparte's viciousness. Ah, voyons, Comtesse non c'est la Vicomte, said Anna Pavlovna, joyfully sensing that something à la Louis XV echoed in this phrase. Comtesse non c'est la Vicomte. The Vicomte bowed as a sign of submission and smiled politely. Anna Pavlovna circled around the Vicomte and invited everyone to listen to his story. Le Vicomte a été personnellement connu de monsieur, Anna Pavlovna whispered to one. Le Vicomte est un parfait conteur, she said to another. Comme on voit l'homme de la bonne compagnie, she said to a third, and the Vicomte was presented to the company in a most refined and advantageous light, like a roast beef on a hot platter sprinkled with herbs. The Vicomte was just about to begin his story and smiled subtly. Come over here, chère Hélène. Chérie Hélène, Anna Pavlovna said to the beautiful princess, who was sitting some way off, forming the center of another circle. Princess Hélène was smiling. She got up with the same unchanging smile of a perfectly beautiful woman with which she had entered the drawing room. Lightly rustling her white ball gown trimmed with ivy and moss, her white shoulders gleaming, her hair and diamonds shining, she walked straight on between the parted men, not looking at anyone but smiling to everyone, as if kindly granting each of them the right to admire the beauty of her figure, of her full shoulders, of her very exposed bosom and back, as the fashion then was, and as if bringing with her the brilliance of a ball, approached Anna Pavlovna. Helene was so good-looking that there was not only not a trace of coquetry to be seen in her, but on the contrary, it was as if she was embarrassed by her unquestionable and all too strongly and triumphantly effective beauty. It was as if she wished, but was unable to diminish the effect of her beauty. Quelle belle personne, said everyone who saw her, as if struck by something extraordinary. The Vicomte shrugged his shoulders and lowered his eyes while she was seating herself before him and shining upon him that same unchanging smile. Madame, je crains pas mes moyens devant un bel auditeur, he said, inclining his head with a smile. The princess rested the elbow of her bare, rounded arm on a little table and did not find it necessary to say anything. She waited, smiling. Throughout the story, she sat erect, glancing occasionally now at her rounded, beautiful arm lying lightly on the table, now at the still more beautiful bosom on which she straightened a diamond necklace. She also straightened the folds of her gown several times, and when the story produced an impression, turned to look at Anna Pavlovna and at once assumed the same expression as on the maid of honor's face, and then settled back into a radiant smile. After Helene, the little princess also came over from the tea table. Attendez-moi, je vais prendre mon ouvrage, she said. Voyons à que pensez-vous? She turned to Prince Hippolyte. Apportez-moi mon réticule. The princess, smiling and talking with everyone, suddenly effected the transposition and taking a seat, cheerily settled herself. "Now I feel good," she said several times, and asking them to begin, started to work. Prince Hippolyte fetched her reticule, came after her, and moving his chair towards her, sat down close by. Le charmant Hippolyte was striking in his extraordinary resemblance to his beautiful sister, and still more in being strikingly unattractive despite that resemblance. The features of his face were the same as his sister's, but in her everything was lit up by her joyous, self-contented, young, unchanging smile and the extraordinary classical beauty of her body. In her brother, on the contrary, the same face was clouded by idiocy and invariably expressed a self-assured peevishness, and his body was skinny and weak. His eyes, nose, and mouth all seemed to shrink into an indefinite and dull grimace. His arms and legs were always assumed an unnatural position. "Ce n'est pas une histoire de prévenance," he said, sitting down near the princess and hastily fixing a lorgnette to his eyes, as if he was unable to start talking without this instrument. "Mais non, mon cher," the surprised storyteller said, shrugging his shoulders. "C'est que je déteste les histoires de prévenance," said Prince Hippolyte in such a tone that it was clear he had said these words and only then understood what they meant. Because of the self-assurance with which he spoke, no one could make out whether what he had said was very clever or very stupid. He was wearing a dark green tailcoat, trousers the color of Suisse de nymphe effraie, and as he said himself, stockings and shoes. The Vicomte told very nicely that the then current anecdote that the Duc d'Enghien had secretly gone to Paris to meet with Mademoiselle Georges, and that there he met Bonaparte, who also enjoyed the famous actress's favors, and that there, having met the Duke, Napoleon happened to fall into one of those faints he was prone to and found himself in the Duke's power, which the Duke did not take advantage of, and that Bonaparte afterwards revenged himself for this magnanimity with the Duke's death. The story was very nice and interesting, especially the moment when the rivals suddenly recognized each other, and the ladies, it seemed were stirred. "Charmant," said Anna Pavlova, looking questioningly at the little princess. "Charmant," whispered the little princess, sticking the needle into her work as if to signify that the interest and charm of the story kept her from going on working. The Vicomte appreciated this silent praise and smiled gratefully, began to go on, but at that moment Anna Pavlovna, who kept glancing at the young man she found so frightening, noticed that his conversation with the abbé was much too loud and vehement, and she rushed to the rescue at the place of danger. Indeed, Pierre had managed to strike up a conversation with the abbé about political balance, and the abbé, obviously intrigued by the young man's simple-hearted vehemence, was developing his favorite idea before him. The two men listened and talked too animatedly and naturally, and it was this that Anna Pavlovna did not like. The means are European balance and the droit de gêne, the abbé was saying. Let a powerful state like Russia, famous for its barbarism, stand disinterestedly at the head of a union having at its purpose the balance of Europe, and it will save the world. "How are you going to find such a balance?" Pierre began, but just then Anna Pavlovna came over and with a stern glance at Pierre, asked the Italian how he was taking the local climate. The Italian's face suddenly changed and acquired an insultingly false sweetness of expression, which was probably habitual with him in conversations with women. "I'm so enchanted with the charms of the intelligence and cultivation of society, especially the women's, where I have had the happiness to be received, that I have not yet had the time to think about the climbing," he said. Not letting go of the abbé and Pierre, Anna Pavlovna, the better to keep an eye on them, joined them to the general circle. Just then a new person entered the drawing room. This person was the young Prince Andrei Bolkonsky, the little princess's husband. Prince Bolkonsky was of medium height, a rather handsome young man with well-defined and dry features. Everything in his figure, from his weary, bored gaze to his quiet, measured gait, presented the sharpest contrast with his small, lively wife. Obviously, he not only knew everyone in the drawing room, but was so sick of them that it was very boring for him to look at them and listen to them. Of all the faces he found so boring, the face of his pretty wife seemed to be the one he was most sick of. With a grimace that spoiled his handsome face, he turned away from her. He kissed Anna Pavlovna's hand and, narrowing his eyes, looked around at the whole company. Vous enrôlez pas la guerre, mon prince, said Anna Pavlovna. Le General Kutuzov, said Bolkonsky, emphasizing the last syllable. Zoff, like a Frenchman. A bien voulu de moi pour aide de camp. At least votre femme, she'll go to the country. Shame on you to deprive us of your lovely wife. André, said his wife, addressing her husband in the same coquettish tone in which she addressed others, what a story the Vicomte told us about Mademoiselle Georges and Bonaparte. Prince André closed his eyes and turned away. Pierre, who had not taken his joyful, friendly eyes off Prince André since he entered the drawing room, went up to him and took his arm. Prince André, without turning around, wrinkled his face into a grimace, expressing vexation at whoever had taken his arm, but seeing Pierre's smiling face, suddenly smiled an unexpectedly kind and pleasant smile. Well, well, so you too are in high society, he said to Pierre. I knew you'd be here, Pierre replied. I'll come to you for supper, he added softly, so as not to interfere with the Vicomte who was going on with his story. May I? No, you may not, Prince André said, laughing, letting Pierre know by the pressure of his hand that there was no need to ask. He was about to say more, but just then Prince Vasily and his daughter rose, and the men stood up to let them pass. You will excuse me, my dear Vicomte, said Prince Vasily to the Frenchman, gently pulling him down on his chair by the sleeve so that he would not stand up. This unfortunate fit at the ambassador's deprives me of my pleasure and interrupts you. I'm very sorry to leave your delightful soiree, he said to Anna Pavlovna. His daughter, Princess Helene, lightly holding the folds of her gown, walked between the chairs, and the smile shone still more brightly on her beautiful face. Pierre looked with enraptured, almost frightened eyes at this beauty as she walked past him. Very good looking, said Prince André. Very, said Pierre. Passing by, Prince Vasily seized Pierre by the hand and turned to Anna Pavlovna. Educate this bear for me, he said. He's been living with me for a month, and this is the first time I've seen him in society. Nothing is so necessary for a young man as the company of intelligent women. And that's probably as good a place as any to stop. Great finishing line. Nothing is so necessary for a young man as the company of intelligent women. Well, that's been section 2 and segment 3 in part 1. Volume 1, Part 1 of War and Peace. Again, I'm going to try to do this around between 3 and 4 most weekdays. So check the channel. I'll post a little bit on Facebook to remind people. And I won't do it tomorrow or Sunday, but I'll return again on Monday. I appreciate those who joined, mostly my mom, but that's great. At least she gets to hear me reading aloud. And very supportive, so thanks, Mom. And if you have any questions, feel free to comment on the video. I will continue to try to look up some of the French beforehand if I can, or some of the spelling of names so we get them said right. And I hope you all have a great weekend. Please continue to stay safe. If you're going out, make sure you're wearing masks, and if you choose to wear gloves, make sure that when you do something, you take your gloves off before you touch all the rest of your stuff, or be sure to wash your hands very thoroughly, or your gloves. Remember, it's about cross-contamination, so just use your common sense, use the intelligent mind we all have, and just continue to stay safe. And let's see, I got some comments. My mom, who is saying she will help me with the French. Yes, because she studied French and I didn't. So all to her and all the rest of my French-speaking friends, I'll probably be hitting you guys up for a little help. Thanks everybody again. Have a great Friday. Stay safe. Good afternoon, and welcome back to War and Peace Read Aloud Quarantine Story Time with me, Charlotte. Quick recap, this is our third reading. We're in Volume 1, Part 1, Subsection 4 today. What's happened so far? We've just met some of the characters, Prince Vasily, Anna Pavlovna, who's a socialite who's having a party, and let's say we've got Prince Andrei and his wife, who is pregnant, and we also have the gorgeous Princess Helene, who is Prince Vasily's daughter, also Pierre, a bastard son of someone who is at this party and it's first time hanging out in public, or like at a formal function, and he's a bit of a bear of a man. What else? Oh, and there's still the thought in the background of hooking up Prince Vasily's son Anatoly with one of the Bolkonskis, I think. We've also discovered that there's a lot of French in this Russian novel because it was quite normal. French was the language of diplomacy in the 17 and 1800s, especially in the Russian court, but across Europe and the globe, basically until I think World War I or World War II, it was pretty common for French to be the language of diplomacy, which is probably why it's still I'm sure it's one of the reasons that it is one of the official languages of the UN. Fun fact. So basically I've been reading a section, or as long as I can hold up this book, which I will probably weigh today so I can let you know tomorrow how much I'm holding up here, because it's not small. So let's just dive right into it, see what else Tolstoy has in store for us. I'm pretty sure that he has another trick up his sleeve in addition to the French. So my apologies to any other nationalities that I offend in this reading. Alrighty, let's begin. Anna Pavlovna smiled and promised to occupy herself with Pierre, who she knew was related to Prince Vasily through his father. The elderly lady, who had so far been sitting with ma tante, hastily got up and overtook Prince Vasily in the front hall. All the former sham interest disappeared from her face. Her kind, weepy face expressed only anxiety and fear. "What can you tell me, Prince, about my Boris?" she said, overtaking him in the front hall. She pronounced the name Boris with a special emphasis on the O. "I cannot remain in Petersburg any longer. Tell me, what news can I bring my poor boy?" Though Prince Vasily listened to the elderly lady reluctantly and almost impolitely, and even showed impatience, she smiled at him gently and touchingly, and even took him by the arm to keep him from walking away. "It won't cost you anything to say a word to the sovereign, and he'll be transferred straight away to the guards," she pleaded. "Believe me, Princess, I'll do all I can," replied Prince Vasily. "But it's hard for me to ask the sovereign. I'd advise you to return to Rumyantsev through Prince Golitsyn. That would be smarter." The elderly lady bore the name of Princess Drubetskoy, one of the best families of Russia, but she was poor, had long since left society, and had lost her former connections. She had come now to solicit an appointment to the guards for her only son. She had invited herself and come to Anna Pavlovna's soiree for her only in order to see Prince Vasily. Only for that had she listened to the vacances story. Prince Vasily's words frightened her. Her once beautiful face showed spite. But that lasted no more than a moment. She smiled again and took a slightly stronger grip on Prince Vasily's arm. "Listen, Prince," she said, "I've never asked you for anything, and never will. I've never reminded you of my father's friendship for you, but now I adjure you in God's name, do this for my son, and I will consider you my benefactor, she added hastily. No, don't be angry, but promise me. I asked Galitzin, and he refused. Soyez le bon enfant que vous avez été, she said, trying to smile, though there were tears in her eyes. Papa will be late, said Princess Helene, who was waiting at the door, turning her beautiful head on her classical shoulders. But influence in society is a capital that must be used sparingly lest it disappear. Prince Vasily knew that, and having once realized that if he were to solicit for everyone who solicited from him, it would soon become impossible for him to solicit for himself. He rarely used his influence. In Princess de Pretskoy's case, however, after her new appeal, he felt something like a pang of conscience. She had reminded him of the truth. He owed his first steps in the service to her father. Besides, he could see from the way she behaved that she was one of those women, especially mothers, who once they take something into their heads will not leave off until their desire is fulfilled, and are otherwise prepared to pester you every day and every minute, and even to make scenes. This last consideration gave him pause. Chérie Anna Mikhailovna, he said with a tone of familiarity and boredom, it is almost impossible for me to do what you want, but to prove to you how much I love you and honor the memory of your late father, I will do the impossible. Your son will be transferred to the Guards. Here is my hand on it. Are you satisfied? My dear, you are our benefactor. I expect nothing else from you. I know how kind you are. He was about to leave. Wait, 2 more words. Une fois passé aux Gardes, she faltered. You're on good terms with Mikhail Ilarinovich Kutuzov. Recommend Boris as his adjunct, then I'll be at peace, and Vasily smiled. That I will not promise you. You know how besieged Kutuzov has been since he was appointed commander-in-chief. He told me himself that all the Moscow ladies are conspiring to send their children to be his adjuncts. No, you must promise. I won't let you go, my dear benefactor. Papa, the beauty replied in the same tone, will be late. Well, au revoir, goodbye, see you. So you'll speak to the sovereign tomorrow? Without fail, but to Kutuzov, I don't promise. No, do promise, do please promise, Vasil. Anna Mikhailovna said behind him, with the smile of a young coquette, which must have suited her very well once, but now did not go with her emaciated face. She evidently forgot her age and employed out of habit all her old feminine resources, but as soon as he left, her face again acquired the same cold, sham expression it had had before. She went back to the circle where the Vicomte was going on with his story and again pretended to listen, waiting for the moment to leave since her business was done. But how do you find all this latest comedy, du Sacre de Milan? Asked Anna Pavlovna. Et la nouvelle comédie du plus de jeunes et de luxe, que vient présenter les vieux à Monsieur Bonaparte. Monsieur Bonaparte, assis sur un trône, et escompte les voyous des nations. Adorable. Non, mais c'est un devenir folle. On dirait que le monde entier a perdu la tête. Prince Andrei grinned, looking straight into Anna Pavlovna's face. Dieu me le donne, gars que le touche, he said, Bonaparte's words spoken as the crown was placed on him. On dit qu'elle a été très beau en prononçant ces paroles, he added, and repeated the words once more in Italian. Dio me la donna, gara a chi la tocca. Tocca. J'espère enfin, Anna Pavlovna continued, que ça a été la goutte d'eau que fera déborder le verre. Les souverains ne pouvant plus supporter cet homme que menaces-tu? Les souverains? Je ne parlais pas de la Russie, the Vicomte said courteously and hopelessly. Les souverains, madame? Quand il fait pour lui, the 16th, pour la reine, pour Madame Elizabeth, rien. he continued, growing animated. Écrasez-moi, il subissait le punition pour la trahison de la cause des Bourbons. Les souverains, ils envoyant des ambassadeurs complémentaires les subterres. And with a contemptuous sigh, he again changed position. At these words, Prince Hippolyte, who had long been gazing at the Vicomte through his lorgnette, suddenly turned his whole body to the little princess and asked her for a needle, began showing her the coat of arms of the Condés, drawing with the needle on the table. He explained that the coat of arms to her with a significant air, as if the princess had asked him about it. Bâton de guise, engrelet de guise des yeux, maison Condé, he said. The princess listened, smiling. If Bonaparte remains on the throne of France for another year, the Vicomte continued the new conversation with the air of a man who does not listen to others, but in matters known better to him than to anyone else, follows only the train of his own thoughts. Things will go too far. Intrigues, coercion, banishments, executions will forever destroy French society. I mean good society. And then he shrugged his shoulders and spread out his arms. Pierre was about to say something. The conversation interested him, but Anna Pavlovna, who was keeping watch on him, interrupted. The Emperor Alexander, she said with the sadness that always accompanied her talk about the imperial family, declared that he would leave it to the French themselves to choose their form of government. And I think there's no doubt that the whole nation, freed of the usurper, will throw itself into the arms of the lawful king, Anna Pavlovna said, trying to be amiable to the émigré and royalist. That's doubtful, said Prince André. Monsieur le Vicomte quite rightly supposes that things have already gone too far. I think it will be hard to return to the old ways. From what I've heard, Pierre, blushing again, mixed into the conversation, almost all the nobility have already gone over to Bonaparte's side. It's the Bonapartists who say that, said the Vicomte, not looking at Pierre. Right now it's hard to know public opinion in France. Bonaparte l'a dit, Prince André said with a grin. It was evident that he did not like the Vicomte, and that, though he was not looking at him, his talk was directed at him. Je lui ai montré le chemin de la gloire, he said after a short silence, again repeating the words of Napoleon. Ils n'en ont pas voulu. Je leur ai ouvert mes antichambres. Ils sont précipités et fous. Je ne sais pas à quel point il a eu le droit de le dire. Oh, con, the Vicomte retorted. After the Duke's murder, even the most partial people ceased to see a hero in him. C'est même est un héros pour certains gens, the Vicomte said, turning to Anna Pavlovna. Depuis l'assistant du Duc, il est un martyr de plus dans le ciel, un héros de moins sur la terre. Before Anna Pavlovna and the others had time to smile appreciatively at the words of the Vicomte, Pierre again burst into the conversation, and Anna Pavlovna, though she anticipated that he would say something improper, could no longer stop him. The execution of the Duc d'Achine, said Pierre, was a necessity of state, and I precisely see greatness of soul in the fact that Napoleon was not afraid to take upon himself alone the responsibility for this act. Dieu, mon Dieu, Anna Pavlovna whispered in a frightened whisper. Comment, Monsieur Pierre, vous trouvez que l'assistant est grand de Dahan? Said the little princess, smiling and drawing her towards her. Ah, oh, said various voices. Capita, Prince Hippolyte said in English, began slapping his knee with his palm. The Vicomte merely shrugged. Pierre gazed triumphantly at his listeners over his spectacles. I say that, he went on desperately, because the Bourbons fled from the revolution, abandoning the people to anarchy, and Napoleon alone was able to understand the revolution, to defeat it, and therefore, for the sake of the common good, he could not stop short at the life of a single man. Wouldn't you like to move to that table? Said Anna Pavlovna, but Pierre, not answering, went on with his speech. No, he said, growing more and more inspired. Napoleon is great because he stood above the revolution, put an end to its abuses, and kept all that was good, the equality of citizens and freedom of speech and of the press, and that is the only reason why he gained power. Yes, if he had taken power and, without using it for murder, given it to the lawful king, said the Vicomte, then I would call him a great man. He couldn't do that. The people gave him power only so that he could deliver them from the Bourbons, and because the people saw a great man in him. The revolution was a great thing, Monsieur Pierre went on, showing by this desperate and provocative parenthetical phrase his great youth and desire to speak everything out all the sooner. Revolution and regicide, a great thing, and after that, wouldn't you like to move to that table? Anna Pavlovna repeated. Contrainte sociale, the Vicomte said with a meek smile. I'm not talking about regicide, I'm talking about ideas. Yes, the ideas of pillage, murder, and regicide, an ironic voice interrupted again. Those were extremes, to be sure, but the whole meaning wasn't in them. The meaning was in the rights of man, emancipation from prejudice, the equality of citizens, and Napoleon kept all these ideas in all their force. Liberty and equality, the Vicomte said scornfully, as if finally deciding to prove seriously to this young man all the stupidity of his talk. These are resounding words that have long been compromised. Who doesn't love liberty and equality? Our Savior already preached liberty and equality. Did people become happier after the revolution? On the contrary, we wanted liberty, but Bonaparte destroyed it. Prince André kept glancing with a smile now at Pierre, now at the Vicomte, and now at the hostess. For the first moment of Pierre's outburst, Anna Pavlovna was horrified, accustomed though she was to society. But when she saw that despite the blasphemous speeches uttered by Pierre, the Vicomte did not lose his temper, and when she became certain that it was now impossible to suppress these speeches, she gathered her forces and, joining the Vicomte, attacked the orator. Mais, mon cher Monsieur Pierre, said Anna Pavlovna, how do you explain a great man who can execute a duke, or finally any simple man, without trial and without guilt? I'd like to ask, said the Vicomte, how Monsieur explains the 18th Brumaire. Was that not a deception? C'est un escamotage qui ne ressemble nullement à la manger des aiguilles d'un grand homme. And the prisoners he killed in Africa, said the little princess. It's terrible. She shrugged her shoulders. C'est un bouteille, vous avez bu dire, said Prince Hippolyte. Monsieur Pierre did not know whom to answer, looking around at them all, and smiled. His smile was not like that of other people, blending into a non-smile. With him, on the contrary, when a smile came, his serious and even somewhat sullen face vanished suddenly, and another appeared, childish, kind, even slightly stupid, and as if apologetic. To the Vicomte, who was meeting him for the first time, it was clear that this Jacobin was not at all as frightening as his words. Everyone fell silent. Do you want him to answer everybody at once? Asked Prince André. Besides, in the acts of a statesman, one must distinguish among the acts of the private person, the military leader, and the emperor. So it seems to me. Yes, of course, Pierre picked up, gladdened by the arrival of unexpected help. It's impossible not to admit, Prince André went on, that Napoleon was a great man on the bridge of Arcole and in the Jaffa hospital when he shook hands with the plague victims. But there are other acts which are hard to justify. Prince André, who had evidently wanted to soften the awkwardness of Pierre's speech, got up, intending to leave, and making a sign to his wife. Suddenly, Prince Hippolyte rose, and gesturing for everyone to stay and sit down, began to speak. Ah, je dirais en m'en raconte une anecdote moscovite charmante. Il fait que je vous en régale. Vous m'excusez, Vicomte, il fait que je raconte en russe. Autrement, on ne s'étira pas le sel de l'histoire. And Prince Hippolyte began to speak in Russian, with a pronunciation such as Frenchmen have after spending a year in Russia. Everyone stayed, so animatedly, so insistently did Prince Hippolyte call for the attention to his story. In Moscow there is a lady, une dame, and she is very stingy. She must have two valets de pied behind the carriage, and a very great height. That was her taste. Now she had une femme de chambre, also of grand height. She said, here Prince Hippolyte fell to thinking, evidently having a hard time working it out. She said, Yes, she said, "Girl," to the femme de chambre, "put on the livrée and come with me behind the carriage, faire visites." Here Prince Hippolyte snorted and guffawed far in advance of his listeners, which produced an impression unfavorable to the narrator. Many smiled, however, the elderly lady and Anna Pavlovna among them. So she went. Suddenly there was a strong wind. The girl lost her hat, and her long hairs came undone. Here he could no longer control himself and began laughing fitfully, saying through his laughter, "And the whole world found out." With that the anecdote ended, though it was not clear why he had told it and why it absolutely had to be told in Russian. All the same, Anna Pavlovna and the others appreciated Prince Hippolyte's social grace in thus pleasantly putting on end to Monsieur Pierre's unpleasant and ungracious outburst. After the anecdote, the conversation broke into small, insignificant commentaries on past and future balls, on performances, and on who one would see whom, when, and where. Well, I think that's as good of a place to stop as any. And we will see who, when, and where tomorrow. Thank you again for suffering through with me in Tolstoy's multilingual challenge. Even some Italian, which that was pretty sad. But I don't profess to speak Italian, though I should. Again, tune in with me tomorrow for more War and Peace. And around between 3 and 4 is when I'll usually do it. Let me know if you have any questions. Drop comments in the video below. I'll keep it up on my channel. Not that anyone needs it, but stay safe, everyone, and hope you're having a safe and healthy quarantine. Bye! Good afternoon. Happy Tuesday, everybody. I'm Charlotte, and I'm back with more Quarantine Story Hour, reading aloud from this little book you may have heard of, War and Peace. And as an addendum to what I've been complaining about the last couple of days, about the weight of this book, where the pages are super thick. You can't even see how thin. Like, they're super dense and they're thin pages. It's very dense. I weighed it today. It's about 4 pounds. So I don't know if that's really fair to complain. But 4 pounds is a lot in one hand after like 20 minutes of holding it in like a static position. So I think what I'm saying is I have like wrists of steel after this. But aside from that, what did we have last time? Yesterday was a lot of social banter, a little upset as our interesting man, Pierre, who is kind of the odd man out in the social soiree scene, caused a bit of an upset by vehemently voicing his political opinions, much to the consternation of all the Russian aristocracy who were at this little soiree, Anna Pavlovna's. And a older lady was able to convince Prince Vasily to speak to a general about getting her son a position as a guard or something, like in the National Guard kind of thing. So kind of outside of his usual apathetic zone. But yeah, that's basically the end of it. They're debating the merits of Bonaparte and his beheading of some people and stuff like that. And the French Revolution. Let's see, what else do I got? Today is my good friend Kim's birthday, so happy birthday, Kim. Thought I'd do a special shout out on the channel. She wants everyone to send like dance videos, so that'll come later for her, but there's a little dance in my seat video with a book. Alright, so there's that. Happy birthday! So let's get into it, and hopefully there won't be too much, I anticipate there will be more horrible French. Sorry about that, guys. And the surprise last time was also that they threw in like a sentence of Italian, just to keep everyone on their toes. So here we are. These things happen. I might change the time that I do the reading in the next couple days, because right now it's sometime between 3 and 4, and right now it's like 4, so I'm kind of pushing it. I might change it to slightly later in the day, or maybe slightly earlier, like just after a late lunch, just because it's kind of in a weird time when I'm trying to keep myself scheduled and busy, which has been part of keeping myself mentally well during this time. In addition to reading to everyone here on the internets, I am also trying to give myself like a bit of a daily routine, which sometimes interrupting that to have this in the middle is like weird. So we'll see. If anyone has thoughts on that, feel free to drop some comments. Otherwise, we'll just see what we see. But let's get into it, because it looks like it's a short chapter and then a long chapter today, so we might be here for a minute. So buckle up, folks. Let's get ready for some bad foreign language reading in a classic novel. So this is in the book is Volume 1, Part 1, and this would be like chapter or section 5. Having thanked Anna Pavlovna for her charmante soirée, the guests began to leave. Pierre was clumsy. Fat, unusually tall, broad, with enormous red hands, he did not, as they say, know how to enter a salon, and still less, he did not know how to leave one. That is, by saying something especially pleasant at the door. Besides that, he was absent-minded. Getting up, he took a 3-cornered hat with a general's plumage instead of his own, and held on to it, plucking at the feathers until the general asked him to give it back. But all his absent-mindedness and inability to enter a salon and speak in it were redeemed by his expression of good nature, simplicity, and modesty. Anna Pavlovna turned to him and, with a Christian meekness expressing forgiveness for his outburst, nodded to him and said, "I hope to see you again, but I also hope that we will change your opinions, my dear Monsieur Pierre," she said. When she said this to him, he made no reply, but only bowed and once more showed everyone his smile, which said nothing except perhaps this: "Opinions are opinions, but you see what a good and nice fellow I am." And everyone, including Anna Pavlovna, involuntarily felt it. Prince Andrei went out to the front hall and, offering his shoulders to the footman who was putting his cloak on him, listened indifferently to his wife's chatter with Prince Hippolyte, who also came out to the front hall. Prince Hippolyte stood beside the pretty pregnant princess and looked at her directly and intently through his lorgnette. "Go in, Annette, you'll catch cold," said the little princess, taking leave of Anna Pavlovna. "C'est après," she added softly. Anna Pavlovna had already managed to speak with Lisa about the match she was contriving between Anatoly and the little princess's sister-in-law. "I'm relying on you, my dear friend," Anna Pavlovna said also softly. "You'll write to her and tell me. Comme le Pierre envisagera la chose. Au revoir," and she left the front hall. Prince Hippolyte went over to the little princess and, bringing his face down close to hers, began saying something to her in a half-whisper. 2 footmen, one the princess's and the other his, waiting for them to finish talking, stood with shawl and redingote and listened to their French talk, which they could not understand, with such faces as if they understood what was being said but did not want to show it. The princess, as usual, talked smilingly and listened laughingly. "I'm very glad I didn't go to mustache lip pulling upward. All the beautiful society women will be there." "Not all, since you won't be there, not at all," said Prince Hippolyte, laughing joyfully, and snatching the shawl from the footman, even shoving him, he began putting it on the princess. Either from awkwardness or intentionally, no one would have been able to tell, he was a long while lowering his arms, even when the shawl was already put on, and it was as if he was embracing the young woman. Graciously, but still smiling, she withdrew, turned, and looked at her husband. Prince Andrei's eyes were shut, which made him look tired and sleepy. "Are you ready, madame?" he asked his wife, looking past her. Prince Hippolyte hastily put on his redingote, which, in the new style, hung lower than his heels, and tangling himself in it, ran to the porch after the princess, whom the footman was helping into the carriage. "Princess, au revoir," he cried, his tongue getting as tangled as his feet. The princess, picking up her dress, was settling herself into the darkness of the carriage. Her husband was straightening his sword. Prince Hippolyte, on the pretext of being of service, got in everyone's way. Excuse me, sir. Prince Andrei, with dry unpleasantness, addressed himself in Russian to Prince Hippolyte, who was standing in his way. I'll be waiting for you, Pierre, the same voice of Prince Andrei said gently and tenderly. The postilion touched up the horses, and the wheels of the carriage rumbled. Prince Hippolyte laughed fitfully, standing on the porch and waiting for the Viscount, whom he had promised to take home. Eh bien, mon cher, votre petite princesse est très bien, said the Viscount, getting into the carriage with Hippolyte. Marche très bien. He kissed the tips of his fingers. Et tout à fait français. Prince Hippolyte laughed with a snort. Et savez-vous que vous êtes très belle avec votre petit air innocent? The Viscount continued. Je plains le pauvre mari, ce petit officier que se donne des airs de prince régnant. Hippolyte snorted again and said through his laughter, Et vous disiez que les dames russes me valentent, pas les dames françaises, il fait savoir s'y prendre. Pierre, arriving first, went to Prince Andrei's study, being a familiar of the house, and as was his habit, at once lay down on the sofa, took the first book that caught his eye from the shelf, it was Caesar's Commentaries, and leaning on his elbow began reading it from the middle. What have you done to Mademoiselle Scherer? She'll be quite ill now, said Prince Andrei, coming into his study and rubbing his small white hands. Pierre swung his whole body so that the sofa creaked, turned his animated face to Prince Andrei, smiled and waved his hand. No, that abbé is very interesting, only he has the wrong notion of things. In my opinion, eternal peace is possible, but I don't know how to say it, only it's not through political balance. Prince Andrei was obviously not interested in these abstract conversations. Mon cher, you can't go saying what you think everywhere. Well, so have you finally decided on everything? Are you going to be a house guard or a horse guard or a diplomat? Prince Andrei asked after a moment's silence. Pierre sat up on the sofa with both legs tucked under him. Can you imagine? I still don't know. I don't like either of them. But you must decide on something. Your father's waiting. At the age of 10, Pierre had been sent abroad with an abbé tutor and had remained there until he was 20. When he returned to Moscow, his father dismissed the abbé and said to the young man, Go to Petersburg now, look around, and choose. I'll agree to anything. Here's a letter to Prince Vasily, and here's some money. Write to me about everything. I'll help you in everything. Pierre had been choosing a career for 3 months already and had done nothing. This was the choice that Prince Andrei was talking about with him. Pierre rubbed his forehead. But he must be a mason, he said, meaning the abbé he had seen at the soirée. That's all rubbish, Prince Andrei stopped him again. Better let's talk about business. Have you been to the Horse Guards? No, I haven't, but here's what's come into my mind, and I want to tell you. There's a war now against Napoleon. If it were a war for freedom, I could understand it. I'd be the first to go into military service, but to help England and Austria against the greatest man in the world, is not right. Prince Andrei merely shrugged his shoulders at Pierre's childish talk. He made it look as though he could not reply to such stupidity, but in fact, it was hard to reply to this naive question in any other way than Prince Andrei had done. If everyone made war only according to his own convictions, there would be no war, he said. That would be excellent, said Pierre. Prince Andrei smiled. It might very well be excellent, but it will never happen. Well, what makes you go to war? Asked Pierre. What makes me? I don't know, I have to. Besides, I'm going. He paused. I'm going because this life I lead here, this life is not for me. Section 6. There was the rustle of a woman's dress in the next room. Prince Andrei shook himself as if coming to his senses, and his face took on the same expression it had in Anna Pavlovna's drawing room. Pierre lowered his legs from the sofa. The princess came in. She had already changed to a house dress, but one just as elegant and fresh. Prince Andrei stood up, politely moving an armchair for her. Why is it, I often wonder, she began, in French as always, hurriedly and fussily sitting down in the armchair. Why is it that Annette has never married? How stupid you all are, messieurs, not to have married her. Forgive me, but you understand nothing about women. You're such an arguer, Monsieur Pierre. I also keep arguing with your husband. I don't understand why he wants to go to war, said Pierre without any constraint. So usual in the relations of a young man with a young woman, turning to the princess. The princess gave a flutter. Evidently Pierre's words had touched her to the quick. Ah, that's just what I say, she said. I don't understand. I decidedly do not understand why men can't live without war. Why is it that we women want none of it and have no need of it? Well, you be the judge. I keep telling him. Here he's his uncle's adjunct, a most brilliant position. He's so well known, so appreciated by everyone. The other day at the Apraxins, I heard a lady ask, C'est qu'à le fameux Prince André, ma preuve d'honneur. She laughed. He's so well received everywhere. He could easily become an imperial adjunct. You know, the sovereign spoke to him very graciously. Annette and I were saying that it could easily be arranged. What do you think? Pierre looked at Prince André and, noticing that his friend did not like this conversation, made no reply. When do you go? He asked. Ne me parlez pas de ce départ. Ne m'inquiète pas. Je ne veux pas en entendre parler. The prince said in the same capriciously playful tone in which the princess said in the same capriciously playful tone in which she had spoken with Hippolyte in the drawing room, and which was so obviously unsuited to the family circle, where Pierre was like a member. Today, when I thought of how I'd have to break off all these dear relations, and then, you know, André, she winked meaningfully at her husband, Je perds. She whispered, her back shuddering. Her husband looked at her as if he were surprised to notice that there was someone else in the room besides himself and Pierre. However, with cold politeness, he inquiringly addressed his wife. What are you afraid of, Liza? I cannot understand, he said. See what egoists all men are? All egoists. For the sake of his whims, God knows why, he abandons me. He locks me up in the country alone. With my father and sister, don't forget, said Prince André quietly. Alone all the same without my friends. And he wants me to be afraid. And he wants me not to be afraid. Her tone was querulous now. Her little lip rose, giving her face not a joyful, but an animalish, squirrel-like expression. She fell silent, as if finding it indecent to speak of her pregnancy in front of Pierre. Prince André said slowly, not taking his eyes off his wife. The princess blushed and waved her hands desperately. Non, André, je dis que vous avez tellement changé. Your doctor tells you to go to bed earlier, said Prince André. You should get some sleep. The princess said nothing, and her short lip with its little mustache suddenly trembled. Prince André, getting up and shrugging his shoulders, began to pace the room. Pierre gazed wonderingly and naively through his spectacles, now at him, now at the princess, and stirred as if he also wanted to get up, but changed his mind again. What do I care if Monsieur Pierre is here? The little princess said suddenly, and her pretty face suddenly spread into a tearful grimace. I've long wanted to say to you, André, why have you changed so much towards me? What have I done to you? You're going into the army, and you have no pity for me. Why is it? Lise, was all Prince André said, but in this word there was an entreaty, and a threat, and above all the conviction that she herself would regret her words, but she hurriedly went on. You treat me like a sick person or a child. I see it all. You weren't like this 6 months ago. Lise, I beg you to stop, Prince André said, still more expressively. Pierre, who was becoming more and more agitated during this conversation, got up and went over to the princess. He seemed unable to bear the sight of tears and was about to start crying himself. Calm yourself, princess. It seems so to you because I assure you I myself have experienced. Why? Because, no, excuse me, an outsider is in the way here. No, calm yourself. Goodbye. Prince André caught him by the arm. No, wait, Pierre. The princess is so good that she will not want to deprive me of the pleasure of spending an evening with you. No, he thinks only of himself, said the princess, not holding back her angry tears. Lise, Prince André said dryly, right? Welcome back, everyone. I'm Charlotte, and this is my quarantine story time, reading aloud from books of all kinds, but right now starting with a classic. This little novel you know as War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. This translation it's a new translation by Richard Pavir and Larissa Volokhonsky. So just want to give credit where it's due. We got cut off yesterday. I've heard that YouTube's having trouble with their content monitoring because more of it's been moved to like automated content monitoring, like through probably artificial intelligence. Sometimes the computer is not always as good as telling what's offensive or copyrighted as humans are. So job security, everyone. The machines haven't taken over yet. So that being said, I'm picking up where I got cut off yesterday. The video from yesterday is back up on my channel. So if you check out my War and Peace playlist, you'll see all of the readings up until now in order. And they're numbered at the end of the title. It'll say it'll say 3 numbers separated by a dot. The first number is the volume number because this book is broken up into multiple volumes. And then parts that are the volumes broken up into different parts, and then each of those parts is broken up into different numbered segments. And I'm guessing that's because this book was originally published by Leo Tolstoy as a serial, so it was something that would have come out in a magazine every month or every week. Kind of fun. So kind of like today's television miniseries, except before there's television, people just read their miniseries. So that's how this was, and that's probably maybe why this book got to be so long, because you don't want to end a good miniseries. So Leo Tolstoy did that. But anyway, so the book is up. There's been, I think this will be the 5th reading that I've done so far, but they're all up under a War and Peace playlist. So you can catch up if you want. If you didn't get to watch yesterday's, I got cut off in the middle, like I said, because of some kind of a content problem, but I think it was like some kind of a bug with the YouTube content management software, because it's back up, no problem. So I'll include the link at the bottom of this video for yesterday's video, so you can check out, I was reading section 5 and 6 from the volume 1 part 1, and I got cut off part of the way through. So I'm going to pick up where I left off in the middle of that section 6. So if you need to catch up on what's going on, jump back in there. But basically, recap, there was the soiree at Anna Pavlovna's house, lots of little intrigues burbling, and now we're back at Prince Andrei and his wife, his pregnant wife's house with their good friend Pierre, who, among other things, is a bastard son of someone well-to-do and is back in Petersburg trying to figure out his fortune. Has just attended this soiree as a sort of first introduction into Russian social life. And he's good friends with Prince Andrei, and they're having sort of a frank discussion at his house, and his wife, Prince Andrei's wife, is complaining that Prince Andrei is treating her differently now that she's pregnant, and he wants to go off to war and leave her alone in the countryside with his family, and she just wants to be in society with her friends. She doesn't understand why they can't have this beautiful society life, and he's clearly a quiet man who has these other aspirations beyond just a quiet, kind of flashy society life. So I'm going to try to pick up where I left off again, and hopefully we'll make it through to this time. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments. I will try to get back to them as soon as possible, and again, we'll pick up again tomorrow. So, like I said, Prince Andrei is trying to stave off an argument/discussion with his wife Lise, and Pierre is sitting in the room at the same time and just kind of agitated by being in the midst of this sort of, husband-wife spat. Let's see. And so we'll pick up with Pierre's thing. Let's see. Prince Andrei. Lise, I beg you to stop, Prince Andrei said, still more expressively. Pierre, who was becoming more and more agitated during this conversation, got up and went over to the princess. He seemed unable to bear the sight of tears and was about to start crying himself. Calm yourself, princess. It seems so to you, because I assure you I myself have experienced... No, excuse me, an outsider is in the way here. No, calm yourself. Goodbye. Prince Andrei caught him by the arm. No, wait, Pierre. The princess is so good that she will not want to deprive me of the pleasure of spending an evening with you. No, he thinks only of himself, said the princess, not holding back her angry tears. Lise, Prince Andrei said dryly, raising his tone to a degree which showed that his patience had run out. Suddenly, the angry, squirrel-like expression on the princess's beautiful little face changed to an attractive and compassion-provoking expression of fear. Her pretty eyes glanced from under her eyebrows at her husband, and her face acquired the timid and admissive look of a dog rapidly but weakly wagging its drooping tail. Mon Dieu, said the princess, taking up a fold of her dress in one hand, went over to her husband and kissed him on the forehead. Bonsoir, Lise, said Prince Andrei, standing up and kissing her hand politely as if she were a stranger. The friends were silent. Neither of them would begin talking. Pierre kept glancing at Prince Andrei. Prince Andrei was rubbing his forehead with his small hand. Let's go and have supper, he said with a sigh, getting up and heading for the door. They went into the elegantly, newly, richly decorated dining room. Everything from the napkins to the silverware, china, and crystal bore that special stamp of newness that is found in the households of the recently married. In the middle of supper, the prince leaned his elbow on the table, and with an expression of nervous irritation such as Pierre had never seen in his friend before, began to talk, like a man who had long had something on his heart and suddenly decides to speak it out. Never, never marry, my friend. Here's my advice to you. Don't marry until you can tell yourself that you've done all you could, until you've stopped loving the woman you've chosen, until you see her clearly. Otherwise, you'll be cruelly and irremediably mistaken. Marry when you're old and good for nothing. Otherwise, all that's good and lofty in you will be lost. It will all go on trifles. Yes, don't look at me with such astonishment. If you expect something from yourself in the future, then at every step you'll feel that it's all over for you. It's all closed, except the drawing room where you'll stand on the same level as a clerk flunky and an idiot. Oh, well, he waved his hand energetically. Pierre took off his spectacles, which made his face change, expressing still more kindness, and looked at his friend in astonishment. My wife, Prince Andrei went on, is a wonderful woman. She's one of those rare women with whom one can be at ease regarding one's own honor. But my God, what wouldn't I give now not to be married? You're the first and only one I'm saying this to because I love you. Prince Andrei, in saying this, was less than ever like the Bolkonsky who just sat sprawled in Anna Pavlovna's armchair and narrowing his eyes uttered French phrases through his teeth. His dry face was all a-quiver with the nervous animation of every muscle. His eyes, in which fire of life had seemed extinguished, now shone with a bright, radiant brilliance. One could see that the more lifeless he seemed in ordinary times, the more energetic he was in moments of irritation. You don't understand why I'm saying this, he went on, yet it's a whole life story. You talk of Bonaparte and his career, he said, though Pierre had not talked of Bonaparte. You talk of Bonaparte, but Bonaparte, when he was not working, went step by step towards his goal. He was free, he had nothing except his goal, and he reached it. But bind yourself to a woman, and like a prisoner in irons, you lose all freedom. Whatever hope and strength you have in you, it all only burdens and torments you with remorse. Drawing rooms, gossip, balls, vanity, triviality, that is the vicious cycle I can't get out of. I'm now going to the war, to the greatest war that has ever been, yet I know nothing and am good for nothing. Je suis très aimable et très caustique, Prince Andrei went on, and they listened to me at Anna Pavlova's. And this stupid society without which my life cannot live, and these women, if only you knew what toutes les femmes distinguées and women in general really are. My father is right. Egoism, vanity, dull-wittedness, triviality, and everything. That's women, when they show themselves as they are. Looking at them in society, it seems there's something there, but there's nothing. Nothing. No, don't marry, dear heart, don't marry, Prince Andrei concluded. I find it funny, said Pierre, that you yourself, consider that you have no ability and that your life is ruined. You have everything ahead of you. And he did not say you what, but his tone already showed how highly he valued his friend and how much he expected from him in the future. How can he say that, thought Pierre. Pierre considered Prince Andrei the model of all perfections, precisely because Prince Andrei united in the highest degree all those qualities which Pierre did not possess and which could be most nearly expressed by the notion of strength of will. Pierre always marveled at Prince Andrei's ability to deal calmly with all sorts of people, at his extraordinary memory, his erudition. He had read everything, knew everything, had notions about everything, and most of all at his ability to work in man. If Pierre had often been struck by André's lack of ability for dreamy philosophizing, for which Pierre had a particular inclination, he saw it not as a defect, but as a strength. In the best, the friendliest, and simplest relations, flattery or praise is necessary, just as grease is necessary to keep wheels turning. Je suis un homme fini, said Prince André. Why talk about me? Let's talk about you, he said, pausing and smiling at his comforting thoughts. This smile was instantly reflected on Pierre's face. But what is there to say about me? Asked Pierre, spreading his mouth into a carefree, merry smile. What am I? Je suis un bâtard. And he suddenly flushed crimson. One could see that it had cost him a great effort to say that. Sans nom, sans fortune. And what, really? He did not say what, really. I'm free so far, and I feel fine, only I have no idea where to make my start. I seriously wanted to ask your advice. Prince André looked at him with kindly eyes, but in his friendly, gentle gaze, a consciousness of his own superiority still showed. You're dear to me, especially because you're the only live person in our whole society. That's fine for you. Choose whatever you like, it's all the same. You'll be fine anyway, but there's one thing. Stop going to those corrigans and leading that sort of life. It simply doesn't suit you. All this carousing with hussars and all. Que voulez-vous, mon cher, said Pierre, shrugging his shoulders. Les femmes, mon cher, les femmes. I don't understand, replied André. Les femmes comme il fait are another matter, but les femmes of Corrigan's, les femmes et les vins, I don't understand. Pierre lived at Prince Vasily Corrigan's and took a part in the dissolute life of his son Anatoly, the same one they planned to marry to Prince André's sister in order to reform him. You know what? Said Pierre, as if a lucky thought had unexpectedly occurred to him. Seriously, I've been thinking that for a long time. With this life, I can't decide or even choose anything. I have a headache and no money. He invited me tonight, but I won't go. Give me your word of honor you won't go anymore. Word of honor. It was already past 1 o'clock when Pierre left his friend's house. It was a dustless Petersburg June night. Pierre got into a hired carriage with the intention of going home, but the closer he came, the more he felt the impossibility of falling asleep on that night, which more resembled an evening or a morning. One could see far down the empty streets. On the way, Pierre recalled that the usual gambling company was to gather at Anatoly Corrigan's that evening, after which there was usually drinking, ending with one of Pierre's favorite amusements. It would be nice to go to Corrigan's, he thought, but at once he remembered the word of honor he had given Prince André not to visit Corrigan. But at once, as happens with so-called characterless people, he desired so passionately to experience again that dissolute life so familiar to him that he decided to go, and at once the thought occurred to him that the word he had given meant nothing, because before giving his word to Prince André, he had also given Prince Anatoly his word that he would be there. Finally, he thought all these words of honor were mere conventions with no definite meaning, especially if you considered that you might die the next day, or something so extraordinary might happen to you that there would be no longer be either honor or dishonor. That sort of reasoning often came to Pierre, destroying all his decisions and suppositions. He went to Corrigan's. Driving up to the porch of a large house near the Horse Guards Barracks, in which Anatoly lived, he went up the lighted porch, the stairs, and entered an open door. There was no one in the front hall. Empty bottles, capes, and galoshes were lying about. There was a smell of wine, the noise of distant talking and shouting. Cards and supper were over, but the guests had not dispersed yet. Pierre threw off his cape and went into the first room, where the remains of supper lay, and one lackey, thinking no one could see him, was finishing on the sly what was left in a glass of wine in the glasses. From the third room came a racket, guffawing, the shouting of familiar voices, and the roaring of a bear. Some 8 young men were crowded busily by an open window. 3 were romping with a young bear, one of them dragging it by a chain, trying to frighten the others. "I stake 100 on Stevens," shouted one. "Make sure there's no holding on," shouted another. "I'm for Dolokhov," cried a third. "Break the grip, Corrigan. Let Rud be, we're making a bet." "At one go, otherwise you lose," shouted a fourth. "Yakov! Let's have a bottle, Yakov," shouted the host himself, a tall, handsome man, who was standing in the midst of the crowd in nothing but a fine shirt open at his chest. "Wait, gentlemen, here's Petrushka, my dear friend." He turned to Pierre. Another voice that was that of a not very tall man with clear blue eyes, especially striking amidst all these drunken voices by its sober expression, shouted from the window, "Come here, break the grip!" It was Dolokhov, an officer of the Semyonovsky Regiment, a notorious gambler and duelist who lived with Anatoly. Pierre smiled, looking around merrily. "I don't understand a thing. What's up?" he asked. "Wait, he's not drunk. Give me a bottle," said Anatoly, taking a glass from the table. He went up to Pierre. "First of all, drink." Pierre started drinking glass after glass, looking from under his brows at the drunken guests, who again crowded by the window and listening to their talk. Anatoly poured the wine for him and told him that Dolokhov was making a bet with the Englishman Stevens, a sailor who was there, that he, Dolokhov, could drink a bottle of rum sitting in the third-floor window with his legs hanging out. "Well, drink it all, said Anatoly, handing Pierre the last glass. "Otherwise, I won't let you go." "No, I don't want to," said Pierre, pushing Anatoly away, and he went over to the window. Dolokhov was holding the Englishman by the hand and clearly, distinctly articulating the terms of the bet, mainly addressing Anatoly and Pierre. Dolokhov was a man of medium height, curly-haired, and with light blue eyes. He was about 25. Like all infantry officers, he wore no mustache, and his mouth, the most striking feature of his face, was entirely visible. The lines of his mouth were remarkably finely curved. In the middle, the upper lip came down energetically on the sturdy lower lip in a sharp wedge, and at the corners something like 2 smiles were constantly formed, one on either side, and all of that together, especially combined with a firm, insolent, intelligent gaze, made up such an expression that it was impossible not to notice this face. Dolokhov was not a rich man and had no connections, and though Anatoly ran through tens of thousands, Dolokhov lived with him and managed to place himself so that Anatoly and all those who knew them respected Dolokhov more than Anatoly. Dolokhov gambled at all games and almost always won. No matter how much he drank, he never lost his clear-headedness. Kuragin and Dolokhov were both celebrities at that time in the world of Petersburg scapegraces and carousers. A bottle of rum was brought. 2 lackeys were tearing out the frame that prevented one from standing on the outer ledge of the window. They were obviously hurrying and intimidated by the orders and shouts of the surrounding gentlemen. Anatoly went up to the window with his victorious look. He wanted to break something. He pushed the lackeys away and pulled at the frame, but the frame did not yield. He smashed a pane. "You next, strong man," he turned to Pierre. Pierre took hold of the crosspieces, pulled, and with a crash, Pierre broke and there ripped out the oak frame. "Away with all of it! Otherwise, they'll think I'm holding on," said Dolokhov. "The Englishman's boasting, eh? All right," said Anatoly. "All right," said Pierre, looking at Dolokhov, who was holding the bottle of rum in his hand and was approaching the window, through which the light of the sky could be seen and the glow of morning and evening merging in it. Dolokhov jumped out into the window with the bottle of rum in his hand. "Listen," he shouted, standing on the windowsill and turning to the room. Everyone fell silent. "I put down," he spoke in French so that the Englishman could understand him, and he did not speak the language all that well. "I put down 50 imperials. Want to make it 100? He added, addressing the Englishman. "No, 50, said the Englishman. "Very well, 50 imperials, that I will drink a whole bottle of rum without taking it from my lips, drinking it sitting outside the window on this place." He bent down and indicated the sloping ledge outside the window, and without holding on to anything. "Right?" "Very good," said the Englishman. Anatoly turned to the Englishman, and taking him by the button of his tailcoat, looking at him from above. The Englishman was short. He began repeating the terms of the bet to him in English. "Wait!" cried Dolokhov, tapping the bottle against the window to attract attention. "Wait, Kuragin, listen. If anyone else does the same, I'll pay him 100 imperials. Understand?" The Englishman nodded his head, in no way making it clear whether he did or did not accept this new bet. Anatoly did not let go of the Englishman, and though he had nodded to show he had understood everything, Anatoly translated Dolokhov's words into English for him. A young lean boy, a life hussar, who had gambled away everything that evening, climbed up on the window, stuck his head out, and looked down. "Ooh," he said, looking out the window at the stone pavement. "Attention!" cried Dolokhov, and pulled the officers from the window. Getting tangled in his spurs, the boys jumped down awkwardly into the room. After placing the bottle on the windowsill to have it conveniently at hand, Dolokhov slowly and carefully climbed into the window. Lowering his legs and spreading both hands against the sides of the window, he tried his position, settled himself in, let go with his hands, and shifted a little to the right and to the left and took the bottle. Anatoly brought 2 candles and set them on the windowsill, though it was already quite light. Dólokhov's back in its white shirt and his curly head were lit up from both sides. Everyone crowded by the window. The Englishman stood in front. Pierre smiled and said nothing. One of those present, older than the others, with a frightened and angry face, suddenly moved forward and was about to seize Dólokhov by the shirt. "Gentlemen, this is stupid. He'll kill himself," said this more reasonable man. Anatoly stopped him. "Don't touch. You'll frighten him and he'll be killed. Eh? What then, eh?" Dólokhov turned, adjusting his position and again spreading his hands. "If anyone else tries to get at me," he said, slowly forcing the words through his compressed and thin lips, "I'll chuck him down from here right now. So." Having said so, he turned his back again, let go with his hands, and took the bottle and put it to his lips, threw his head back, and thrust his free arm up for balance. One of the lackeys, who had begun picking up the glasses, stopped in a bent position, not taking his eyes from the window and Dólokhov's back. Anatoly stood erect, his eyes gaping. The Englishman, his lips thrust out, watched from the side. The man who had tried to stop them rushed to the corner of the room and lay down on the sofa, face to the wall. Pierre covered his face, and with a faint smile remained forgotten on it, though it was now expressed terror and fear. Everyone was silent. Pierre took his hands away from his face. Dólokhov was sitting in the same position, only his head was thrown far back, so that the curly hair at his nape touched the collar of his shirt, and the hand holding the bottle rose higher and higher, trembling and making an effort. The bottle was apparently emptying and rising at the same time, pushing the head back. "Why is it taking so long?" thought Pierre. It seemed to him that more than half an hour had gone by. Suddenly, Dólokhov made a backward movement, and his arms trembled nervously. This shudder was enough to shift his whole body, which was sitting on the sloping ledge. He shifted completely, and his arm and head trembled still more from the effort. One arm rose to take hold of the windowsill, but lowered itself again. Pierre again shut his eyes and said to himself that he was never going to open them. Suddenly he felt everything around him stirring. He looked. Dólokhov was standing on the windowsill, his face pale and merry. "Empty!" He tossed the bottle to the Englishman, who deftly caught it. Dólokhov jumped down from the window. He smelled strongly of rum. "Excellent! Good boy! There's a bet for you! Devil take you all!" they cried on all sides. The Englishman, having produced his purse, counted out the money. Dólokhov frowned and said nothing. Pierre climbed into the window. "Gentlemen, who wants to make a bet with me? I'll do the same thing," he shouted suddenly. "There's no need for a bet, that's what. Tell them to bring a bottle. I'll do it. Tell them." Let him, said Dólokhov, smiling. "What, have you lost your mind? Who'd let you? You get dizzy on the stairs," came from the various sides. "I'll drink it. Give me a bottle of rum," Pierre cried. Pounding the table with a determined and drunken gesture, he climbed into the window. They seized him by the arms, but he was so strong that he pushed those who came near him away. "No, you won't get anything with him from that way," said Anatoly. "Wait, I'll trick him. Listen, I'll make a bet with you, but tomorrow. And now let's go," said Pierre. "Let's go. And we'll take Bruin with us." And he seized the bear and, hugging him and lifting him up, began waltzing around the room with him. And that is the end of section 6. We made it through. We didn't get stopped by YouTube. That is excellent. So I'll do a little bit of recap when we jump in tomorrow, but interesting, we're starting to get a little bit more idea of the character of Pierre as well as Anatoly and his compatriots. So the plot thickens. See you all tomorrow. Have a great rest of your day. Happy Wednesday. Hello, happy Thursday. Welcome back to my quarantine story time, read aloud, or quarantine story hour if you prefer, even though it's usually not quite anymore. But today, as we have been with War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. This translation is by Richard Pavir and Larissa Volokonsky. Just giving credit where it's due. If anyone tuned in a couple days ago on Tuesday, I was cut off mid-reading by YouTube's AI. I guess because of COVID-19, fewer humans are monitoring live channels, and there's more AI and computer controlled. So they're cutting more things that they think might violate YouTube's code of conduct. and they said that a lot of it will probably be fake, like incorrect flagging of violations. So I was able to appeal, and it's back up on my channel. So I will drop the link to probably the playlist. I have a playlist of all the live readings I've done so far. I have that playlist available on my channel, so I'll probably drop that link in the bottom of this video so you can catch up. If this is your first time tuning in, if you tuned in and then wondered what happened, you can pick up. They're all numbered by volume number, and then part within the volume, and then like chapter or segment number within that part. So it's like volume dot part dot whatever segment. So the segment number will change, and so far that's as far as we've gotten. We haven't gotten into another part or volume because this is a 4-pound book and we're only a few days in. But I think it's about a week. So yay, happy week of listening to War and Peace with me. Let's see what happened in yesterday's reading. I just picked up where the AI had cut me off before and finished that section, which was segment 6. And in that segment, Prince Andre is trying to get his friend Pierre. First of all, he's saying don't marry because that's like the end of your life, especially if you're a man with ambition. And then second of all, he is telling him and encouraging him to like make better choices with his life and help figure out what he wants to do with his life. As Pierre seems to be like a really nice guy, but kind of a flighty sort of chap who isn't able to really fix his mind and do anything, and is kind of fallen with the crowd in Petersburg that's just partying all the time and gambling and drinking and meeting up with ladies. So he is asking him to kind of distance himself from that crowd, which he says he's going to do, and then right after he leaves, he changes his mind and goes to meet up with them, and they're having a drinking bet and that sort of thing. So he seems to be very easily swayed. So that's where we are. So I'm going to read segment 7 and 8 today. So that's volume 1, part 1, 7 and 8, if you're following along at home. Again, my apologies for my horrible French and my butchering of the Russian names and any random Italian that Tolstoy decides to throw in, because it's going to be a multilingual book. Considering it was written in the original Russian, yeah, there's a lot going on here. Okay, that's all right. So, without further ado, let's jump in. Prince Vasily fulfilled the promise he had given at Anna Pavlovna's soiree to Princess Drubetskoy, who had solicited him for her only son, Boris. A report on him was made to the sovereign, and unlike others, he was transferred to the Semyonovsky Guards Regiment as an ensign. But Boris was not to be appointed adjunct or an attaché to Kutuzov, despite all that Anna Mikhailovna's soliciting and scheming. Soon after Anna Pavlovna's soiree, Anna Mikhailovna returned to Moscow straight to her rich relations, the Rostovs, with whom she stayed in Moscow, and with whom her adored Borenka, just made an ensign in the army and transferred to the Guards, had been brought up and lived for years. The Guards had already left Petersburg on the 10th of August, and her son, who had remained in Moscow to equip himself, was to catch up with them on the way to Radzivilov. At the Rostovs, it was the name day of the Natalias, mother and younger daughter. Since morning, coach and sixes had constantly been driving up and leaving, bringing people with congratulations to the big house of the Countess Rostov on Povarovskaya Street, which was known to all Moscow. The Countess, with her beautiful older daughter, and the guests, who constantly replaced each other, were sitting in the drawing room. The Countess was a woman with a thin, oriental type of face, 45 years old, evidently worn out by children, of whom she had 12. The slowness of her movements and speech, caused by weakness, gave her an air of importance that inspired respect. Princess Anna Mikhailovna Drubetskoy, as a member of the household, sat right there, helping with the business of receiving the guests and occupying them with conversation. The young people were in the back rooms, finding it unnecessary to take part in the preceding visits. The Count met the guests and saw them off, inviting them all to dinner. Much obliged to you, mon cher or mon cher, he said, mon cher or mon cher, to everyone without exception and without the slightest nuance, whether they were of higher or lower standing than himself. For myself and the dear name-day ladies, see that you come for dinner. You'll offend me if you don't, mon cher. I cordially invite you on behalf of the whole family, mon cher. These words he said with the same expression on his full, cheerful, and clean-shaven face, with the same strong handshake and repeated short bows to everyone without exception or variation. Having seen off a guest, the Count would return to the gentleman or lady who was still in the drawing room, moving up an armchair and with the look of a man who loves life and knows how to live it. Spreading his legs dashingly and putting his hands on his knees, he would sway significantly, offering his surmises about the weather, discuss health, sometimes in Russian, sometimes in very poor but self-confident French. And again, with the look of a man weary but firm in the fulfillment of his duty, would go to see people off, smoothing the thin gray hair over his bald spot, and again invite them to dinner. Occasionally, on returning from the front hall, he would pass through the conservatory and the servants' rooms to a big marble hall where a table of 80 settings had been laid, and looking at the servants carrying silver and china, opening out tables and spreading damask tablecloths, he would call Dmitri Vasilievich, a nobleman who managed all his affairs, and say, well, Mitenka, let's see that it's all nice. Right, he would say, looking over the enormous opened-out table. The main things the set out, so, and sighing contentedly, he would go back to the drawing room. Maria Lvovna Karagin, with daughter, the Countess's enormous footman announced in a bass voice, coming to the door of the drawing room. The Countess pondered and took a pinch of gold snuff box from her husband's portrait on it. Took a pinch from a gold snuff box with her husband's portrait on it. Sorry. I'm worn out with these visits, she said. Well, she'll be the last I've received. She's so prim. Ask her in, she said to the footman in a sad voice, as if to say, well, so finish me off. A tall, stout, proud-looking woman and her round-faced, smiling daughter came into the room, rustling their skirts. Chérie comtesse, il y a longtemps. Elle était le pauvre enfant à Baldes Rozmalski et la comtesse appartient. J'ai si Uris. Women's voices were heard, interrupting each other and merging with the rustling of skirts and the moving of chairs. That sort of conversation began, which is designed to last just long enough so that one can get up at the first pause with a rustling of the skirts, say, Je suis bien charmée, la sainte de mon nom, et la comtesse appartient. And again with a rustling of skirts, go back to the front hall, put on a fur coat or a cloak, and drive off. The conversation turned to the main news of the town at that time, the illness of the rich and famous beau of Catherine's time, old Count Buzukov, and his illegitimate son Pierre, who had behaved so improperly at Anna Pavlovna Schurer's soiree. I'm very sorry for the poor Count, said the guest. He was in poor health to begin with, and now this distress on account of his son, it will kill him. What do you mean? Asked the Comtesse, as if she did not know what the guest was talking about, though she had already heard the cause of Count Buzukov's distress a good 15 times. It's modern upbringing while still abroad, the guest went on. This young man was left to himself, and now in Petersburg, they say, he did such awful things that he's been banished by the police. You don't say, said the Countess. He chose his acquaintances poorly. Princess Anna Mikhailovna mixed in. Prince Vasily's son, he and a certain Dolokhov, they say, were up to God knows what, and they both suffered for it. Dolokhov has been broken to the ranks, and Bezukov's son has been banished to Moscow. As for Anatoly Korygin, his father somehow hushed it up, but they did banish him from Petersburg. Why, what on earth did they do? Asked the Countess. They're perfect ruffians, especially Dolokhov, said the guest. He's the son of Maria Ivanovna Dolokhov, such a respectable lady, and what then? Can you imagine? The three of them found a bear somewhere, put it in the carriage with them, and went to the actresses. The police came running to quiet them down. They took a policeman and tied him back to back with the bear and threw the bear into the moika. So the bear goes swimming about with the policeman on him. A fine figure the police must have cut, mon cher, cried the Count, dying with laughter. Ah, how terrible! What is there to laugh at, Count? But the ladies could not help laughing themselves. They barely managed to save the poor fellow, the guest went on. That's how intelligently the son of Count Kirill Vladimirovich Bezokov amuses himself, she added. And I heard he was so well-bred and intelligent. There's what all this foreign upbringing leads to. I hope no one receives him here, despite his wealth. They want to introduce him to me. I decidedly refused. I have daughters. What makes you say this young man is so wealthy? Asked the Countess, leaning away from the girls who at once pretended they were not listening. The man has only illegitimate children, it seems. Pierre, too, is illegitimate. The guest waved her hand. He has a score of them, I should think. Princess Anna Mikhailovna mixed into the conversation, clearly wishing to show her connections and her knowledge with all the circumstances of society. The thing is, she said significantly and also in a half-whisper, Count Kirill Vladimirovich's reputation is well known. He's lost count of his children, but this Pierre was his favorite. How good-looking the old man was, said the Countess. Even last year, I've never seen a handsomer man. He's quite changed now, said Anna Mikhailovna. So, as I was about to say, she went on, Prince Vasily is the direct heir to the whole fortune, through his wife, but the father loved Pierre very much, concerned himself with his upbringing, and wrote to the sovereign, so that when he dies, he's so poorly that they expect at any moment, and Lorraine has come from Petersburg. No one knows who will get this enormous fortune, Pierre or Prince Vasily. 40,000 souls, and millions of rubles. I know it very well because Prince Vasily told me himself. And Kirill Vladimirovich is my uncle twice removed through my mother, and he's Borya's godfather, she added, as if ascribing no importance to this circumstance. Prince Vasily came to Moscow yesterday. He's going to do some inspecting, I'm told, said the guest. Yes, but entre nous, said the Countess. It's a pretext. He's come, essentially, to see Count Kirill Vladimirovich, having learned that he was so poorly. However, mon cher, that was a nice stunt, said the Count, and noticing that the elder guest was not listening, he turned to the young ladies. A fine figure that policeman cut, I imagine. And picturing how the policeman waved his arms, he again burst into a resounding bass-voiced laughter which shook his whole stout body, as people laugh who always eat and especially drink very well. So please do come for dinner, he said. Section 8. Silence ensued. The Countess looked at the guest with a pleasant smile, without concealing, however, that she would not be upset in the least if the guest got up and left. The guest daughter was already smoothing her dress, looking questioningly at her mother, when suddenly from the neighboring room came the sound of several men's and women's feet running to the door, the crash of a tripped-over and fallen chair, and a 13-year-old girl ran in, bundling something in her short muslin skirt, stopped in the middle of the room. It was obvious that she had run so far inadvertently, miscalculating the distance. At the same moment, a student in a raspberry-colored collar and an officer of the guards, a 15-year-old girl, and a fat, red-cheeked boy in a child's jacket appeared in the doorway. The Count jumped up and, swaying, spread his arms wide around the running child. Ah, here she is, he shouted, laughing. The name-day girl, mon cher name-day girl. Mon cher, il est un temps pour tout, said the Countess, feigning sternness. You always spoil her, Hélène, she said to her husband. Bonjour, mon cher, je vous félicite, said the guest. Quel délicieux enfant, she added, turning the mother. The dark-eyed, big-mouthed, not beautiful, but lively girl with her child's bare shoulders popping out of her bodice from running fast, with her black ringlets all thrown back, her thin bare arms, and her little legs in lace-trimmed knickers and low shoes, was at the sweet age when a girl is no longer a child, but the child is not yet a young lady. Wriggling out of her father's arms, she ran to her mother and, paying no attention to her stern remark, buried her face in her mother's lace mantilla and laughed. She laughed at something, talking fitfully about the doll she took out from under her skirt. "You see, my doll, Mimi, you see?" And Natasha could say no more. Everything seemed funny to her. She fell on her mother and burst into such loud and ringing laughter that everyone else, even the prim guests, laughed involuntarily. "Well, off you go, you and that ugly thing," said the mother, pushing her daughter away with feigned roughness. "This is my younger one," she turned to the guest. Natasha, tearing her face momentarily from her mother's lace wrap, looked up at her through tears of laughter and hid her face again. The guest, forced to admire the family scene, found it necessary to take some part in it. "Tell me, my dear," she said, addressing Natasha, "what is this Mimi to you? Your daughter, it must be?" Natasha did not like the tone of condescension to childish talk in which the guest addressed her. She made no reply and gave the guest a serious look. Meanwhile, all this younger generation, Boris, the officer, son of Princess Anna Mikhailovna, Nikolai, the student, and the Count's eldest son, Sonia, the Count's 15-year-old niece. Meanwhile, all this younger generation, Boris, the officer, son of Princess Anna Mikhailovna, Nikolai, the student, the Count's eldest son, Sonia, the Count's 15-year-old niece, and Petrushka, the youngest child, all settled themselves in the drawing room and obviously tried to keep within the limits of propriety the animation and gaiety which their every feature still breathed. It was clear that there in the back rooms from which they had all come running so precipitously, the talk was merrier than the talk here about town gossip, the weather, and the Comtesse Apocine. They glanced at each other from time to time and could barely hold back their laughter. The two young men, the student and the officer, friends from childhood, were of the same age and both handsome, but they did not resemble each other. Boris was a tall, blonde youth with the regular fine features of a calm, handsome face. Nikolai was a curly-haired young man, not very tall, and with an open expression of his face. On his upper lip a little dark hair had already appeared, and his whole face expressed impetuousness and rapturousness. Nikolai blushed as soon as he came into the drawing room. One could see that he was searching for something to say and could not find it. Boris, on the other hand, got his bearings at once and told calmly, jokingly, how he had known that this Mimi, the doll, when she was still a young girl with an unspoiled nose, and how she had grown old in the 5 years he remembered, and how her head had gotten cracked across the entire skull. Having said this, he glanced at Natasha. Natasha turned away from him, glanced at her younger brother, who, with his eyes shut tight, was shaking with soundless laughter, and unable to hold herself back any longer, jumped down and ran out of the room as fast as her quick feet could carry her. Boris did not laugh. "I believe you also wanted to go, Maman? Did you need a carriage?" he said, turning to his mother with a smile. "Yes, go, tell them to make ready," she said, smiling. Boris quietly went to the door and followed Natasha out. The fat boy angrily ran after them, as if vexed at the disturbance that had interfered with his pursuits. And I think I'm going to end it there for today. I have some other things I have to jump on at 4. I have been entreated by my beloved mother to be more, how shall we say, consistent with the time of this, just in case you are really trying to tune in. So to that end, I will try to keep it closer to 3. Yeah, I might even move it a little earlier. Still not sure, but for now, I'll try to keep it closer to 3. You can, I hate to say this, but you can stay subscribed to the channel, and then you should get a notification when I'm live. Also, I'm setting up a little flare on Facebook a few minutes before I go live. And if you can't watch me live, that's totally okay. Just like I said, stay subscribed to the channel. And even if you're not subscribed, you can still see my playlists. And there's a War and Peace playlist, like I said, that'll have all the videos, so you can catch up or go back and listen to one that didn't make any sense, or use it to show your friends how poor my French is and why they should study better when they choose a language. I didn't choose French, but you know, I did learn some and I should know better. But I don't, so ta-da! Alright, that's War and Peace for today. And stay tuned tomorrow around 3 p.m. for the next section, and we'll see what these crazy kids get up to. Thanks all. Happy Thursday. Hello. Happy Friday again for anyone who was here 20 minutes ago when I started the first time. I don't know what happened. My computer just kicked me off and set me to my home screen, closing all my browser tabs, which I always have several open. So I came back, tried to close some browser tabs, and had some weird problem because YouTube thought I was still streaming even though I was done. Technology. So today's just going to prove, or this week rather, is going to prove then that what could possibly be worse than butchering Leo Tolstoy's work by reading it aloud, having to do the same thing twice. And by the same thing, I mean having to butcher Leo Tolstoy's writing twice. And not like twice as in 2 days in a row, but I mean the same writing, the same segments twice. So bad jokes aside, we'll jump back in to War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. Credit for a translation by Richard Pevere and Larissa Volonkonsky. I guess I'll recap the recap, which is just that kind of getting into who the characters are. Prince Vasily, the reason he is helping Pierre, letting him stay with him, is they're actually kind of distantly related. Prince Vasily's wife is related to Pierre's dad, and Pierre's dad is getting old, wealthy, about to die, but Pierre's a bastard, so he may not be able to inherit, especially because he's one of many bastards that this guy had, evidently. So Prince Vasily is hoping to inherit Pierre's father's fortune, and Pierre is still trying to figure out his life. Meanwhile, he's getting in a lot of trouble, including him and Anatoly and Dolokhov, pretty much getting kicked out of Petersburg society. For many things, but not limited to tying a policeman to a bear and throwing them both in the river. So, yeah. And where we are right now, I'm going to read section 9, 10, and 11. They're all shorter sections today. And where those pick up is at the house of the Count and Countess, where they've been receiving guests all day because of the Countess and her younger daughter's name day celebration. So at this point, some of the kids have come running into the main drawing room where the guests are, and then have been childlike, cute children, and then some of them run back off, and some of them are still in there. And I believe the last of the guests are getting ready to go. So we're going to kind of pick up right back off there. You can, if this is your first time or you don't remember something, feel free to check out all of the past readings on my channel. They're under a War and Peace playlist, and they're all ordered and numbered, so you can kind of pick up in there. And the one I started earlier today has been deleted, so this is today's reading. So, and this is the last reading for the week, and then after today I'll see you guys on Monday. So, happy Friday. Let's see where we go. Of the young people, not including the Countess's elder daughter, who was 4 years older than her sister and already behaved like an adult, and the young lady guest, only Nikolai and the niece Sonia remained in the drawing room. Sonia was a slender, diminutive brunette with a soft gaze shaded by long eyelashes and a thick black braid wound twice around her head. She's a brunette with black hair. Okay. She's also the niece of the Count. Okay. Thick black braid wound twice around her head, and a sallow tinge to the skin of her face, and especially of her bared, lean, but gracefully muscular arms and neck. In the smoothness of her movements, the softness and suppleness of her small limbs, and her somewhat sly and reserved manner, she resembled a pretty but not yet fully formed kitten, who would one day be a lovely little cat. She evidently considered it the proper thing to show by a smile her interest in the general conversation, but against her will, her eyes under their long, thick lashes kept looking with such passionate, girlish adoration at her cousin, who was leaving for the army, that her smile could not deceive anyone for a moment. and it was clear that the little cat crouched down only in order to leap up more energetically and play with her cousin as soon as they, like Boris and Natasha, could get out of this drawing room. Yes, ma chère, said the old count, addressing the guest and pointing to his Nikolai. Here his friend Boris has just been made an officer, and out of friendship, he doesn't want to lag behind. He's leaving both the university and his old father. He's going to the army, ma chère, and a post has already been prepared for him in the archives and all. Isn't that friendship? The count said questioningly. Yes, they say war has been declared, said the guest. They've been saying it for a long time, said the count. Again, they'll talk and leave it at that. Mon cher, that's friendship, he repeated. He's joining the hussars. The guest, not knowing what to say, shook her head. Not at all out of friendship, replied Nikolai, blushing and protesting as if it was a shameful calumny. It's not friendship. I simply feel a calling for military service. He shot a glance at his cousin and the young lady guest. They both looked at him with a smile of approval. Tonight, Schubert will be dining with us. Our colonel in the Pavlogradsky Hussar Regiment. He's been on leave here and is taking him along. What to do? Said the count, shrugging his shoulders and speaking jokingly about a matter that obviously cost him much grief. I've already told you, Papa, said his son, that if you don't want to let me go, I'll stay. But I know I'm not good for anything but military service. I'm not a diplomat, not a functionary, and I'm unable to hide my feelings, the young lady guessed. The little cat fixed her eyes on him. Bonaparte. Julie, Madame Kerrigan's daughter, turned to the young Rostov. What a pity you weren't at the Arkharovs on Thursday. I was bored without you, she said, smiling tenderly at him. The flattered young man, with the coquettish smile of youth, sat closer to her and got into a separate conversation with the smiling Julie. Oh, sorry, the Mademoiselle Kerrigan. No, I was right. Dang it. Sorry. Right, with this acronym got me flustered. The flattered young man, with the coquettish smile of youth, sat closer to her and got into a separate conversation with the smiling Julie, completely unaware that his involuntary smile cut the heart of the blushing and falsely smiling Sonia with the knife of jealousy. In the middle of the conversation, he turned to look at her. Sonia gave him a passionately angry look, and, barely holding back the tears in her eyes, with a false smile on her lips, got up and left the room. All of Nikolai's animation vanished. He waited for the first lull in the conversation and with an upset face left the room to look for Sonia. How crystal clear all these young ones' secrets are, said Anna Mikhailovna, pointing to Nikolai as he left. Cousinage, dangereux voisinage, she added. Yes, said the Countess, with the ray of sunlight that had penetrated the room with the young Yes, said the Countess, when the ray of sunlight that had penetrated the room with the young generation vanished, and as if answering a question no one had asked her, but which constantly preoccupied her. So much suffering, so much anxiety endured so as to rejoice in them now. And now, too, there's really more fear than joy. One is afraid, always afraid. It's precisely the age when there are so many dangers both for girls and for boys. Everything depends on upbringing, said the guest. Yes, true for you, the Countess went on, but to now, thank God, I've been a friend to my children and have enjoyed their full trust, said the Countess, repeating the error of many parents who suppose that their children have no secrets from them. I know that I'll always be my daughter's first confidant, and that if Nikolenka, with his fiery character, gets up to some mischief, boys can't do without it, it still won't be the same as with these Petersburg gentlemen. Yes, nice children, agreed the Count, who always resolved all of the tangled questions by finding everything nice. Just look at him. Decided to be a hussar. Well, what do you want, mon cher? What a sweet young creature your younger one is, said the guest. A ball of fire. Yes, a ball of fire, said the Count. She takes after me, and what a voice. Though she's my daughter, I'll tell you the truth. She'll be a singer, another Salomoni. We've hired an Italian to teach her. Isn't it too early? They say it harms the voice to study at that age. Oh no, not too early at all, said the Count. How is it then that our mothers got married when they were only 12 or 13? She's already in love with Boris now. What a one, said the Countess, smiling quietly, looking at Boris's mother, and evidently responding to the thought that always preoccupied her. She went on. Well, so you see, if I were strict with her, if I forbade her, God knows what they'll do on the sly. The Countess meant they would be kissing. But now I know her every word. She'll come running to me herself in the evening and tell me everything. I may be spoiling her, but it really seems better. I was strict with the elder one. Yes, I was brought up quite differently, said the elder one, the beautiful Countess Vera, smiling. But the smile did not embellish Vera's face, as usually happens. On the contrary, her face became unnatural and therefore unpleasant. The elder one, Vera, was good-looking, far from stupid, an excellent student, well brought up, had a pleasant voice, and what she said was correct and appropriate, but strangely, everyone, both the guest and the Countess, turned to look at her as if wondering why she had said it, and they felt awkward. One is always too clever with the older children, wanting to do something extraordinary, said the guest. There is no use denying it, mon cher, the dear Countess was too clever with Vera, said the Count. Well, so what, she still turned out nice, he added, winking at Vera approvingly. The guests got up and left, promising to come for dinner. What manners they sat and sat, said the Countess, after seeing the guests off. When Natasha left the drawing room and ran off, she ran no further than the conservatory. In that room she stopped, listening to the talk in the drawing room and waiting for Boris to come out. She was already growing impatient, stamping her little foot, was about to cry because he did not come at once, when she heard the neither slow nor quick but proper footsteps of the young man. Natasha quickly darted among the tubs of plants and hid herself. Boris stopped in the middle of the room, looked around, brushed some specks of dust off the sleeve of his uniform with his hand, and went up to a mirror, studying his handsome face. Natasha kept still, peeking from her ambush, waiting to see what he would do. He stood for some time before the mirror, smiled, and walked to the other door. Natasha was about to call him, but then changed her mind. Let him search, she said to herself. As soon as Boris left, the flushed Sonia came from the other door, whispering something spitefully through her tears. Natasha restrained her first impulse to rush out to her and remained in her ambush as if under the cap of invisibility, observing what went on in the world. She experienced a special new pleasure. Sonia was whispering something and kept looking back at the door of the drawing room. Nikolai came out of that door. Sonia, what's wrong? How can you? Said Nikolai, rushing to her. Never mind, leave me alone. Sonia burst into sobs. No, I know what it is. So you know, and that's wonderful, and so go to her. Sonia, one word, how can you torment me and yourself so because of a fantasy, said Nikolai, taking her hand. Sonia did not pull her hand away and stopped crying. Natasha, motionless and breathless, with shining eyes, watched from behind her ambush. What will happen now, she thought. Sonia, the whole world is no use to me. You alone are everything, said Nikolai. I'll prove it to you. I don't like it when you talk like that. Well, then I won't. Forgive me, Sonia. He drew her to him and kissed her. Ah, how nice, thought Natasha. And when Sonia and Nikolai left the room, she went out after them and called Boris. Boris, come here, she said with a significant and sly air. There's something I must tell you. Here, she said, and led him to the conservatory, to the place between the tubs where she had been hiding. Boris, smiling, followed her. What is this something? He asked. She became embarrassed, looked around, and seeing her doll abandoned in the tub, took it in her hands. Kiss the doll, she said. Boris looked into her animated face with attentive, gentle eyes and said nothing. You don't want to? Well, come here then, she said, and went deeper among the plants and dropped her doll. Closer, closer, she whispered. She caught the officer by the cuffs with both hands, and her flushed face showed solemnity and fear. And do you want to kiss me? She whispered, barely audibly, looking at him from under her eyebrows, smiling and almost weeping with excitement. Boris blushed. You are so funny, he said, bending down to her, blushing still more, but not undertaking anything, and waiting. She suddenly jumped onto a tub, becoming taller than he, embraced him with her thin bare arms, which bent higher than his neck, and tossing her hair back with a movement of the head, kissed him right on the lips. She slipped between the pots to the other side of the plants and stopped, her head lowered. Natasha, he said, you know I love you, but you're in love with me? Natasha interrupted. Yes, I am, but please, let's not do like just now. Another 4 years, then I'll ask for your hand. Natasha reflected. 13, 14, 15, 16, she said, counting on her thin little fingers. All right, so it's settled? And a smile of joy and reassurance lit up her animated face. Settled, said Boris. Forever, said the girl, till death? And taking her under the arm, with a happy face, she slowly walked beside him to the sitting room. Section 11. The Countess was so tired out from the visits that she ordered no one else to be received, and the porter was told simply to be sure to invite for dinner everyone who came by with congratulations. The Countess wanted to talk personally with her childhood friend, Princess Anna Mikhailovna, whom she had not seen properly since her return from Petersburg. Anna Mikhailovna, with her weepy and pleasant face, moved closer to the Countess's armchair. I'll be perfectly frank with you, said Anna Mikhailovna. There are a few of us old friends to get left. That's why I cherish your friendship so much. Anna Mikhailovna looked at Vera and stopped. The Countess pressed her friend's hand. Vera, said the Countess, turning to her older daughter, obviously not her favorite, how is it you have no notion of anything? Can't you feel that you're not needed here? Go to your sisters, or... The beautiful Vera smiled disdainfully, apparently not feeling the slightest offense. If you had told me long ago, Mamma, I would have left at once, she said, and went to her room. But passing through the sitting room, she noticed two couples sitting symmetrically by the two windows. She stopped and smiled disdainfully. Sonia was sitting close to Nikolai, who was writing out some verses for her, the first he had ever written. Boris and Natasha were sitting by the other window and fell silent when Vera came in. Sonia and Natasha looked at Vera with guilty and happy faces. It was amusing and touching to look at these enamored girls, but the sight of them evidently did not arouse any pleasant feelings in Vera. How many times have I asked you not to take my things, she said. You have a room of your own. She took the inkstand from Nikolai. Just a moment, he said, dipping his pen. You managed to do everything at the wrong time, said Vera. The way you came running into the drawing room just now, everyone was ashamed of you. In spite of, or precisely because of the fact that what she said was perfectly correct, no one answered her, and the four only exchanged glances with each other. She lingered in the room, with the inkstand in her hand. And what secrets can there be at your age between Natasha and Boris, and between you two? It's all silliness. Well, what does it matter to you, Vera? Natasha said, pleadingly in a quiet little voice. Clearly, that day, she was being kinder and more affectionate with everyone than ever. Very silly, said Vera. I'm ashamed of you. Why secrets? We all have our secrets. We don't bother you and Berg, Natasha said, flaring up. Of course you don't, said Vera, because there can never be anything bad in my actions. But I shall tell Mama how you behave with Boris. Natalia Ilyinichna behaves very well with me, said Boris. I can't complain, he said. Stop it, Boris. You're such a diplomat. The word diplomat was much in vogue among children in that special sense they endowed it with. It's even boring, Natasha said in an offended, trembling tone. Why is she pestering me? You'll never understand it, she said, turning to Vera. You'll never understand it, she said, turning to Vera, because you've never loved anyone. You have no heart. You're just a Madame de Genlis. This nickname, considered very offensive, had been given to Vera by Nikolai. And your highest pleasure is to do unpleasant things to others. Go and flirt with Berg as much as you like, she said quickly. I certainly won't go running after a young man in front of guests. Well, she's done it, Nikolai mixed in. She said unpleasant things to everybody and upset everybody. Let's go to the nursery. All four, like a frightened flock of birds, got up and left. They said unpleasant things to me, but I said nothing to anybody, said Vera. Madame de Genlis, laughing voices said behind the door. The beautiful Vera, who had such an irritating, unpleasant effect on everybody, smiled, and apparently untouched by what had been said to her, went up to the mirror and straightened her scarf and hair. Looking at her beautiful face, she appeared to become even colder and calmer. In the drawing room, the conversation was still going on. Ah, chérie, said the Countess. In my life, tout n'est pas rosé. Don't I see that du train que nous allons? Our fortune won't last long. It's all his club and his kindness. Our life in the country, is that any respite? Theater, hunting, God knows what. Ah, why ask about me? Well, how did you arrange it all? I often marvel at you, Annette, how at your age you can gallop off in a carriage by yourself to Moscow, to Petersburg, to all the ministers, to all the nobility, and you know how to deal with them all. I marvel at it. Well, how did it get arranged? I don't know how to do any of it. Ah, my dear heart, Princess Anna Mikhailovna replied, God forbid that you ever learn how hard it is to be left a widow without support, and with a son whom you love to distraction. One learns everything, she went on with a certain pride. My lawsuit has taught me. If I need to see one of these trumps, I write a note. Princess Untel wishes to see so-and-so, and I go in person, in a hired cab, 2, even 3 times, even 4, until I get what I want. It's all the same to me what they think of me. Well, whom did you solicit for Borenka? Asked the Countess. Here's your son. Your son is an officer in the guards, and Nikolushka is going as a junker. There's no one to solicit. Who did you ask? Prince Vasily. He was very nice. He agreed at once to do everything and reported to the Emperor, Princess Anna Mikhailovna said with rapture, forgetting entirely all about the humiliation she had gone through to achieve her goal. And what? Has he aged, Prince Vasily? Asked the Countess. I haven't seen him since our theater performance at the Rumyantsevs. And I suppose he's forgotten me. Il me faisait la cour, the Countess remembered with a smile. He's the same as ever, replied Anna Mikhailovna, amiable, overflowing. Les grandioses ne lui ont pas tourné la tête de tout. I'm sorry I can do so little for you, dear princess, he says to me. I'm yours to command. No, he's a nice man, an excellent family, but you know my love for my son, Napoli. I don't know what I wouldn't do for his happiness. And my circumstances are so bad, Anna Mikhailovna went on sadly, lowering her voice, so bad that I'm now in a most terrible position. My wretched lawsuit eats up all I have and doesn't get anywhere. Can you imagine? I don't even have 10 kopecks à la lettre, and I don't know how I'll pay to acquit Boris. She took out a handkerchief and began to cry. I need 500 rubles, and all I have is one 25-ruble note. I'm in such a position. My only hope now rests with Count Kirill Alexandrovich Bezukov. If he doesn't care to support his godson, his Boria's godfather, and lay out something for his maintenance, all my troubles will have been in vain. I won't have the money to equip him. The Countess also waxed tearful and silently pondered something. I often think, maybe it's sinful, said the princess, but I often think, here Count Kirill Vladimirovich Bezukov lives alone, this enormous fortune, and what does he live for? Life's a burden to him, and Boria is only beginning to live. He'll surely leave Boris something, said the Countess. God knows, chérie amie, these rich courtiers are such egotists, but even so, I'll go to him now with Boris and tell him outright what it's about. Let them think whatever they like of me. It really makes no difference to me when my son's destiny depends on it. The princess got up. It's now 2 o'clock, and you dine at 4. I have time to go. And with the air of a practical Petersburg lady who knows how to make use of her time, Anna Mikhailovna sent for her son and went out with him to the front hall. Goodbye, dear heart, she said to the Countess, who came to see her to the door. Wish me success, she added in a whisper, so that her son would not hear. Are you going to see Count Kirill Vladimirovich, ma chère? The Count asked from the dining room, also coming out to the front hall. If he's better, invite Pierre to dine with us. He used to come here, danced with the children. Invite him without fail, ma chère. Oh, we'll see how Taras distinguishes himself today. He says that Count Orlov has no such dinners as we're going to have. That is the end of section 11. And I think we'll stop it there for today, seeing as I read a little bit twice. Very interesting. The little intrigues of the children. Everybody has a crush on somebody. And as you may recall, just as by way of explanation, there was something I needed to perhaps expound upon. Oh, well, Anna Mikhailovna certainly stretched the truth about exactly how she got her way with Prince Vasily and how easy it was. It was a little more begging on her part than she kind of remembers, but that's all right. And interesting, the countess and princess titles and how they're all sort of interrelated. And Tolstoy seems to want to use everybody's full name. And I'm also not sure in Russian society if everybody has like a first name, middle name, last name, because sometimes they refer to people just by like a first and last. Sometimes they refer to it by the whole thing, and I wonder if that was entirely common. And then also, as you can see, like, you know, cute like nicknames of like Boris versus Boryanka, or Nikolai versus Nikolushka or something. So definitely some little variations in the name, but it's kind of crazy how he seems to have to write down everyone's like full name every time. Anna Mikhailovna. And then Anna Mikhailovna said to blah, 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 and she said Anna Mikhailovna said to. Yeah, so. Anyways, I ramble on. It's a Friday. I hope everyone has a chance to have a breath of fresh air, enjoy whatever you can in the day, and have a great weekend. See you guys back here on Monday at 3 o'clock. Hopefully we won't have any tech trouble and be going and done quite promptly. So thanks again, and happy Friday, everyone. Have a great weekend. Happy Monday. Welcome to Quarantine Story Time. I'm Charlotte. I'm running late. And I'm here to bring you some more War and Peace until we are required to go outside. We'll be here reading this book. Should take us some time. Hopefully, just hopefully it'll be fun on the way. Anyways, so thank you for joining me. Sorry I'm late. There was a really long line at the grocery store, and my shopping list was all out of order. But I got good things, so yay. Happy to be able to stay fed and make good food for those around me. Hey, Mom's here. Hi, Mom. Thanks for joining. She's used to me being late because it's been a long-standing family trait. Anyways, so we're on War and Peace. We're going to be doing sections 12 through 14 today in this version of War and Peace, which is written by Leo Tolstoy, and this particular translation is by Richard Pavir and Larisa Volkonsky. So, if you have it, follow along and criticize all my bad pronunciation. Let's see. A lot of intrigue going on. You know, there's the Countess's family, and that we've been kind of eavesdropping on their lives as they're having like a name day or like probably like birthday celebration sort of thing for the Countess and her daughter. I guess name day is different, but whatever. Is name day related to, does anyone know if is it related, in Russia would it be related to like the feast of a specific saint, or I would think so, like if you're, in this case it's a Natasha, Natalia kind of situation, so your name day you'd be celebrating like the day, the saint who had your same name, their whatever their day is. There's been a lot of gossip about the Count who might die, who's Pierre's father. Pierre's his bastard son, one of many evidently, but also his favorite. And there's talk about whether Pierre will inherit the fortune, or the person Pierre's currently staying with, which is Prince Vasily, who is related to the Count via his wife, via Prince Vasily's wife, and so Prince Vasily might be angling for the money. Also, the little cousins at the Countess's, I forget what her name is. She's like the cousin of Anna Mikhailovna or something. But the kids and their cousins all have little like crushes on each other. Then there's the older daughter who like is just a snot. Is probably like raised differently than everyone else, and so has her own little attitude going on. But anyways, so let's jump back in. If you haven't, this is your first time, welcome. Since there's, at some point it'll be really hard for me to recap everything that's going on, so you'll probably just want to maybe, I'll do a little recap at the beginning, and then you'll want to like maybe check out the playlist I have of all the other previous readings so you can catch up if you want. Otherwise, you know, you can always just spark notes or, you know, clip notes, what's going on. So we're still at the house of Countess Rostov, and her good friend and distant relative, I believe, Princess Anna Mikhailovna, who is actually quite destitute, is taking her son Boris to go visit this Count Bezukov, I think, who's dying because there's some distant relative there. Oh, I know, because Boris is his godson, so she's hoping that he'll help Boris out before he dies. So there's that. Let's see, Mom said, Russian name days are an interesting tradition with Christian origins and part of Russian culture. When a Russian person is named after a saint, he or she has the opportunity to... Shouldn't finish. Celebrate the day appointed for the saint in addition to a birthday. The name day is also called the Angel Day. Oh, okay. Thanks, Mom. Yeah, so that's kind of what I thought. It's not really their birthday, but it's another birthday-like celebration. But it's related to if they have a name, if they're named after a saint. So the Saint's Day, so Saint Natasha's Day or whatever, they're celebrating this because the Countess and her youngest daughter both have the same name as the saint. So yeah, thanks, Mom, for sharing that. If anybody has any questions or comments, feel free to drop them in the live chat. And I don't look up once I start reading that much, but I will try to like keep an eye out. So if you have any questions, that's what. And after the video is posted, there'll be a link to the playlist, or you can go to my channel and look for the War and Peace playlist for other of the readings. So, without further ado, Section 12. Mon cher Boris, Princess Anna Mikhailovna said to her son when Countess Rostov's carriage, in which they were sitting, drove down the straw-laid street and into the wide courtyard of Count Kirill Vladimirovich Bezukov. Mon cher Boris, said the mother, freeing her hand from under her old mantle and placing it with a timid and caressing movement on her son's hand. Be gentle, be attentive. Count Kirill Vladimirovich is, after all, your godfather, and your future fate depends on him. Remember that, mon cher. Be nice, as you know how to be. If I knew anything would come of it, besides humiliation, her son replied coldly, but I've promised you, and I'm doing it for you. Despite the fact that someone's carriage was standing at the entrance, the porter, having looked over the mother and son, who, without asking to be announced, had walked directly through the glass entryway between two rows of statues and niches, with a significant glance at the old mantle, asked whom they wanted to see, the princesses or the count, and on learning that it was the count, said that His Excellency was feeling worse that day, and that His Excellency was not receiving anyone. We can leave, the son said in French. Mon ami, the mother said in a pleading voice, again touching her son's hand, as if this touch would calm or encourage him. Boris fell silent, and, without taking off his overcoat, looked questioningly at his mother. Dearest, Anna Mikhailovna said in a tender little voice, turning to the porter, I know Count Kirill Vladimirovich is very ill. That's why I've come. I'm a relation. I won't trouble anyone, dearest. All I need is to see Prince Vasily Sergeyevich. He is staying here, I believe. Announce us, please. The porter suddenly pulled the bell rope that rang upstairs and turned away. Princess Dubretskoy to see Prince Vasily Sergeyevich, he called out to the servant in stocking shoes and a tailcoat who came running down and was now peering from the turn of the stairway. The mother soothed the folds of her re-dyed silk dress, looked in a full-length Venetian mirror on the wall, and in her down-on-heels shoes, went briskly up the carpet of the stairs. Mon cher, vous m'avez promis, she addressed her son again, touching his hand to encourage him. The son, lowering his eyes, calmly followed after her. They entered a large room in which one door led to the apartment assigned to Prince Vasily. As the mother and son reached the middle of the room, intending to ask their way from an old servant who had jumped up when they came in, the bronze handle of one of the doors turned, and Prince Vasily, in an informal velvet house jacket with one star, came out accompanying a handsome, dark-haired man. This man was the famous Petersburg doctor Lorraine. C'est donc positif, the prince was saying. Mon prince, erreur humaine est mais, the doctor replied, swallowing his R's and pronouncing the Latin words with a French accent. C'est bien, c'est bien. Noticing Anna Mikhailovna and her son, Prince Vasily dismissed the doctor with a bow and silently, but with a questioning look, came over to them. The son noticed how deep grief suddenly appeared in his mother's eyes and smiled slightly. Yes, Prince, we meet here under such sad circumstances. Well, how is our dear patient? She said, as if oblivious of the cold, insulting gaze directed at her. Prince Vasily looked questioningly, to the point of bewilderment, at her, then at Boris. Boris bowed courteously. Prince Vasily, without responding to the bow, turned to Anna Mikhailovna and replied to her question with a movement of the head and lips signifying the worst hopes for the patient. Can it be? Exclaimed Anna Mikhailovna. Ah, it's terrible. I'm afraid to think. This is my son, she added, pointing to Boris. He wanted to thank you himself. Boris once more bowed courteously. Believe me, Prince, a mother's heart will never forget what you have done for us. I'm glad that I could give you pleasure, my dearest Anna Mikhailovna, said Prince Vasily, straightening his jabot and in his gesture and voice displaying here, in Moscow, before the patronized Anna Mikhailovna, far greater importance than in Petersburg, at Annette Scherer's soiree. Try to serve well and be worthy, he added, sternly addressing Boris. I'm glad. You're here on leave, he dictated in his passionless tone. Awaiting orders, Your Excellency, to be dispatched to my new assignment, replied Boris, showing neither vexation at the prince's abrupt tone, nor the wish to get into conversation, but so calmly and deferentially that the prince looked at him intently. You live with your mother? I live at the Countess Rostov's, said Boris, again adding, Your Excellency. It's that Ilya Rostov who married Nathalie Shinshin, said Anna Mikhailovna. I know, said Prince Vasily in his monotone voice. Je n'ai jamais trop concevoir comment Nathalie s'est décidée et asposeuse. C'est aus malèche, un personnage complètement stupide et ridicule, et joyeux à ce qu'on dit. Mas très brave homme, mon prince, observed Anna Mikhailovna, smiling touchingly, as though she too knew that Count Rostov deserved such an opinion, but begged for pity on the poor man. What do the doctors say? The prince asked, after a brief pause, and again showing great sorrow. What do the doctors say? The princess asked, again after a brief pause, and again showing great sorrow on her weepy face. There's little hope, said the prince. And I wish so much to thank Uncle for all his benefactions to me and to Borya. C'est son felu, she added in such a tone, as though this news was to make Prince Vasily extremely glad. Prince Vasily pondered and winced. Anna Mikhailovna understood that he feared to find in her a rival over Count Bezukhov's will. She hastened to reassure him. If it weren't for my true love and devotion to Uncle, she said, uttering this word with a special assurance and casualness, I know his character noble and direct, but there are just the princesses around him. They're still young. She inclined her head and added in a whisper, Has he fulfilled his last duty, Prince? How precious these last moments are. It cannot get any worse. He must be prepared, if he's so poorly. We women, she smiled tenderly, always know how to say these things, Prince. I must see him. However hard it is for me, by now I'm used to suffering. The prince apparently realized, as at Annette's Scherer's soiree, that it was difficult to get rid of Anna Mikhailovna.
Don't overthink it.
This meeting might be hard on him.
Oh, boy.
Chérie Anna Mikhailovna, he said. Let's wait till evening. The doctors have predicted a crisis. But we cannot wait, Prince, at such a moment. Pensez, il y va du salut de son âme. Ah, c'est terrible les devoirs chrétiens. The door to the inner room opened, and one of the young princesses, the count's nieces, came out with a cold and sullen face and a long waist, strikingly out of proportion with her legs. qu'est-ce que tu fais? She added, rolling up her eyes sympathetically. The princess made no reply, did not even smile, and left at once. Anna Mikhailovna took off her gloves and settled into a hard-won position in an armchair, inviting Prince Vasily to sit down beside her. Boris, she said to her son and smiled, I'll go to the count, my uncle, and meanwhile you go to Pierre, mon ami, and don't forget to convey to him an invitation from the Rostovs. They're inviting him to dinner. You won't go, I suppose, she turned to the prince. On the contrary, said the prince, now plainly out of sorts, je serai towards him, would have used this chance to rile the count. He nevertheless went to his father's part of the house the day he arrived. On entering the drawing room, where the princesses were usually to be found, he greeted the ladies who were sitting over their embroidery and a book, which one of them was reading aloud. There were 3 of them,